Illuminati. The Illuminati created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal's power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller, not some troubled youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
God's had to build my own family. I hate your son. I hate your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
Created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal's power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller, not some troubled youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
God's had to build my own family. I hate your son. I hate your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
Created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller. Have some trouble, youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
I had to build my own family. I ain't your son. I ain't your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
Created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller. Have some trouble, youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
I had to build my own family. I ain't your son. I ain't your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
What is up, everybody? This is SilverSpook, and this is the SilverSpook live stream. All right, 1 second here. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us. Don't forget, everything that we do here is of course supported by the sales of Neofeud and of course Decolonators. As you can see there on your on the bottom of the screen. I'm sorry. You can also support us by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/Neofeud to continue supporting all the work that we are doing here, including making of all these panels like Indigenous History and Future, talking to John Romero and other Indigenous game devs like myself, as well as making video games like Neofeud and the sequel, which I'm currently hard at work on, Neofeud 2. Trying to get that done as fast as humanly possible. Doing a lot of debugging, today and yesterday of I have maxed out on the total number of animations in one character object. So I was like having to figure out workarounds. So it's going to be a very large and expansive game. You know, I hope Neofeud has more animations. I hope Neofeud is more expansive than the U.S. military. You know, it's the most based entity in the world. 800 military bases in almost every country on Earth. So I hope Neofeud is more based and more expansive than the U.S. military. That's my goal. I'm not sure if I can get an $800 billion budget, but I'm going to call up my central bank and ask them to print a whole bunch of world reserve currency. I don't have a silver dollar for world reserve currency. I'm sorry. I'm going to work on silver coin soon and buy my NFTs. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to sell any NFTs. Anyways, or silver coin. But anyways, so just thanks so much to all the people who have supported us. If you can also share the stream, like the stream, direct donations are available through the StreamYards link. And of course, as always, just thanks for watching and listening. So, what's going on here? So today, I the kind of central topic. I was just reading this article recently about this. I want to do one on a very good show called Our Flag Means Death, but I think I want to finish it first. And besides, this is such a fun thing to talk about. Let's talk about Imperial fantasies. Let's talk about living in Fantasia land. Let's talk about living in unreality. Let's talk about Karl Rove's scrawlings on the inside of a very expensive New York hotel, about living in the post-reality world, and also about living outside of really it's actually outside of history, or it's illusory history. Another word, illusory, also approximately means fantasy. But I was reading this article on this particular game. I haven't actually played this game, just full disclosure. But there's another installment of this multi-decade-old series, Europa, Universalis. I mean, just you listen to that. The title right now, it's kind of like, ooh, it's like looking at like yearbook photos of yourself, you know, with your Kurt Cobain shirt, you know, laughing at Ace Ventura jokes, saying the R slur. You're like, ooh, I don't know about that. Watching like some 90s movies where they're using gayness as a pejorative. Ooh, I don't know about that. You know, you're like Europa Universalis, faith, power, wealth. Ooh, I don't know about that one. I don't know. You know. Anyways, but yeah, we you know, it's like that. It's like the fine line between oops, oof, and yikes, as Holly's friend and co-collaborator Kate Nix would make an album about. Anyways, it's actually oof times yikes, I would argue, this thing. I'm gonna close my window really quickly because the wind is giving me a headache. Really briefly though, before we get back to that, just watch this random slideshow. Okay, anyway. Yeah, so, you know, let me just get to a little bit of this. I feel like I should actually cover a little bit of this since I was going to talk about it. Where did I put the link to that thing? Yeah, it was an interesting, well, not really, well, kind of some ways interesting, some ways terrifying. But this is from an article called Kids Are Learning History Now from Their Video Games. Video games have far surpassed every other medium as in terms of total time and screen ear hole and eye hole and no soul if they get olfactory controllers, and they already have teledildonics, I hear, and they have haptic feedback. They have sense. Some movie theaters have, they splash water on you. They have smells and scents piped in to simulate, I don't know, the rotting flesh, and watching Joe Biden's speeches, because he's an eldritch undead lich. I don't know why you would go to a movie theater to watch Joe Biden give a state of our dystopia. But anyways, kids are now learning history from video games, and so video games are the number one method for people to learn things, which should terrify you. I heard Destiny just got banned from Twitch, so that's a 0.001% of undoing the problems with the open world empire and manufacturing consent through perpetually inescapable matrices of Play-Doh caves that strap to your face and project holographic NATO written, CIA approved propaganda into your face 24/7. That's dystopian enough. I write cyberpunk for a living, and that's already giving me the heebie-jeebies. But anyway, this is interesting. Kids are exposed to historical narratives through the gameplay, but what exactly are they being taught? What are they being taught? Last year, Nicholas Mulder, a history professor at Cornell, asked his Twitter followers to help him understand a certain kind of student in his classes. Players of video game Europa Universalis, the universalization of the European, a pan-European project. It just has a very colonial ring to it. It just kind of like, it's just like, it has like a scintillating champagne. It has a very it has the kind of tinkle, it has the kind of sparkle to it that the $400 million African diamond ensconced in Queen Elizabeth's forehead, has that kind of ring to it. Europa Universalis. Anyways, students keep enrolling in his course on modern Europe because of the game, which he had only recently learned existed. The fact that video game developers rather than professional historians were responsible for shaping so many young people's understanding of history deserve greater examination, however. The Paradox Interactive, a Swedish studio that produces Europa Universalis, our Swedish studio, very important to remember that, are among the most popular strategy titles in the world. Millions of people own the games, which allows players to take control of a historical nation or individual and guide the course of history. The average Europa Universalis player spends hundreds of hours in it. Some spend thousands. So, you're living in, not that you're gonna. I mean, I'll often go, as I'm later in the stream, I will discuss when I'm like 8 layers deep into the matrix simulations. When I've peeled back 25 layers of the onion, then I'm going to start talking more about more directly about these things. But not that history books in the US as a native Hawaiian are I would take issue with this idea that professional historians are doing their job, the ones that are writing my history books, because they're telling me that Hawaii was a backward, savage place in the 1800s, and that's incorrect, as I often discuss on these streams. So I would take issue with the idea that the video games are necessarily worse. I mean, of course, they're not professionals in Western history, in academia, but I would argue that you could actually get a degree from the West and become less proficient at the thing that you're ostensibly an expert at with, $200,000 of student debt and a piece of papyrus, saying that you are. So I would take issue with that. But anyways, let's put that aside and let's pretend like there's an education system in the West. Academic historians, he wrote in a 4-part post on his blog, must now grapple with a new breed of students for whom paradox is the historical mother tongue. That hits weird. For whom paradox is the historical mother tongue. You know what my mother tongue is? My mother tongue was cut out of my mother. Because, Hawaiian was illegal to speak. So that's a weird way to phrase that. Hawaiian was banned in Hawaii by a universalizing Euro power, Euro descendant settler colony. So that's a really weird thing to say. Anyway, actual history is only a second language. Prompted by Mulder's confusion, Devereaux hope to illuminate the historical assumptions that underlie the games. Some time ago, we passed the line where historical video games are at the same level of influence and demand the same level of critical analysis as historically themed. I have a friend, one of my friends, by the way, I just give him a quick shout out while we're on this. Kavika Guillermo is, Dr. Chris Patterson is a professor at UBC. I actually guest lectured at this course and is the writer of Open World Empire, which is specifically about it is a academic discussion of video games and their impact, what they mean. It's a games studies, like in a university level sense of what games are as cultural artifacts, as historical, political, and socially impactful pieces of entertainment, but also education and also everything else. And so Open World Empire is about how Empire specifically is impacted by how Empire creates and also is regenerated by massive, in particular, big AAA video games that are made by with revolving door positions at the Pentagon that go into LA, interactive entertainment studios. The usual suspects, EA, Activision, etc. And then they go back, and then they go back into DC and they come into LA video game studios and they go, and also Hollywood, of course. So there's very much there is some of that going on, but not enough, obviously. Analyzing video games is particularly difficult for two reasons. First, their influence is hard to track. Teachers may not even notice a student asking why the Ottomans didn't colonize America, or what happened to Burgundy may have a view of history that was molded by Paradox Games. The student in your class that knows that what Prussia is the student that played Europa Universalis 4. Devereaux said. And second, unlike other cultural mediums, games are about systems. They're about the mechanics. Those systems and mechanics are how video games teach people history. The presence of such mechanics, though, does not mean the players will necessarily understand them. The major challenge is getting players to recognize and think explicitly about these systems. Marion Cruz, an assistant professor of classics at the University of Cincinnati, a dedicated gamer, told me. Now, of course, there's a lot of ifs and there's a lot of contingencies. There's a lot of if else and there's a lot of assumptions, baked into this, which is that the way that the systems are implemented in the game are accurate, and the way that Western academia understands the systems are also and also teaches the systems are accurate, which I contend with both. I went to the most prestigious of schools in the most advanced superpower that the West has ever produced, and I did not learn the things I needed to learn there. So I would take issue with a lot of this, actually. But anyways, in my experience, Europa Universalis is particularly effective at teaching users about its systems. Playing in Spain and Europa this name is like a tongue twister. But anyways, playing in Spain in Europa Universalis, you'll learn the power of a good marriage. My cyberpunk glasses will assist me in my pronunciation. This is like, thespian fortitude +3. It's my cyberpunk glasses of thespian fortitude +3. You'll learn the power of a good marriage. Sounds like the beginning of like a Bloomberg article lecturing avocado toast consuming millennials about how to marry properly into the Bezos family or something, so that you can get your life on track by the age of 30 by having 70 billion, like Mackenzie Bezos in the offshore Cayman bank account. Anyways, how to marry properly, the power of a good marriage. 25 things that millennial and Gen Z youngsters have to learn to get their life back on track so they can be economically self-sufficient. Anyway, marry properly, number one. The power of a good marriage, when you see that Spain is actually the result of a personal union between the crowns of Castile and Aragon. If you're unlucky enough to choose a country in the Balkans, you will quickly understand the full force of the Ottoman invasions of Europe. Invade the Soviet Union in Hearts of Iron, Paradox, Second World War Simulator, and you'll be reminded why Napoleon and Hitler both failed to subdue Russia. General Frost. The process the player engages with teach them claims about how the world works, what the Atlantics, Ian Bogus calls procedural red. Now, of course, this is in the Atlantic, so I'm this is not really about the Atlantic. Okay, I know who funds and operates the Atlantic, but I mean, this is the point. The point is about the game, so I'm not gonna take the personal politics of this particular publication too seriously. But anyways, the Paradox type. I'm not gonna click on any of the other links. I'm gonna run out of my 3 free articles for the month of March. Paradox titles don't take a single view of history, but each game does provide a framework for understanding a particular historical period, buoyed by a number of procedural claims. The game essentially simulates the story of Europe. I'm sorry, if this is boring walls of text, I'm sorry. I'll put more video game explosions up next time. More comic book bullshit, buff guys punching each other in the face and cracking, very fast Robert Downey jokes. I'll do that next time. This game essentially simulates the story of Europe's rise from a relative backwater to a continent that dominated the world. That means that no matter what exact course the game takes, it usually results in the consolidation of large, powerful, centralized states in Europe and the rise to global primacy. So that's an important paragraph that, when we talk about my friend Dr. Chris, and we're just gonna be talking about. No, I'm just kidding. When we talk about imperial fantasy, right? And I mean that, of course, I'm trying to piss off a bunch of Gamergate guys so that I can get my algorithmic prowess up a little bit up in this stream. I'm just gonna say that I'm upset about anti-SJWs and dudes need to not be in games anymore so that more people will get mad at this stream and then comment ridiculously. Anyways, but imperial fantasy, I almost called it power fantasy, right? It is a very male power fantasy. It's a cis, white, aristocratic, landed, plutocrat descendant power fantasy, generally. Or temporarily embarrassed millionaire settler colonial power fantasy. But usually it's a very more male fantasy, generally speaking. Not exclusively, obviously. But imperial fantasies specifically, right, are very popular. Strategy games, Call of Duty, Battlefield 2042. These are games where you're on the front lines, right? Getting in the thick of the violence and the genocide and the massacre and the war and the death and taking other people's resources and committing war crimes and blowing up Afghanistan, blowing up Iraq, bombing Libya into the Stone Age. You're making slave markets in 10,000 resolution with real-time feedback with your VR headset on. You're just really just ripping all of those children a new one, all the little black children, right? That's what you like to do because you're an empire. Yeah. Those are the most popular games, are going around the world and slaughtering people for the United States military or its proxy war non-state actors, as they are trying to do in Battlefield 2042, which is, they should call it Battlefield 2042. EA executives need more yachts and they want to get in on that Treyarch money. That's what it should be called. Battlefield. I need more super yachts. Imperial fantasy, back to this article though, is, when they say the game is about simulating, it's about simulating in a real-time interactive simulation, right? It's about reproducing with a lot of verisimilitude. I'd argue it's telling a very good Western illusory, not necessarily Christian, although Christ is important. Really, I think they do say faith is very important, which it is. Faith, specifically the Christian faith. One, Catholic or Protestant, take your pick. There's a lot of there's at least 2 crosses out of 4 flags. Very important. In the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy British Empire, the Holy French Empire, and the Holy Spanish Empire. And now the Holy Neocon, Jesus on the back of a T-Rex with a Remington rifle in one hand, the Bible in the other, laser eyes, blowing up infidels, and then nuclear war because of a no-fly zone over Ukraine, rapturing all of the best Christians into paradise, which is full of ivermectin and Twinkies, obviously. Anyways, so this is a simulation. This is fantasy land. That is, I would argue, like, saying that you are adhering. You don't have background music on. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I throw some background music. I've been enjoying the silence on instruction from fuck, I forgot the British band. I can never remember key names right in the middle of my my random diatribes. But anyways, the game essentially simulates the story of Europe's rise from relative backwater to a continent that dominated the world. That means that no matter what exact course the game takes, it usually results in the consolidation of large, powerful, centralized states in Europe and their rise to global primacy. So, like, this is very important. Like, I actually think that the concept of the game is very important, particularly for Europe, because the United States has surpassed Europe. The United States is using Europe as a meat shield. It's using Europe as a Wiener Schnitzel consuming, Oktoberfest beer drinking, Swedish strategy game making meat shield. That's what Europe is. Europe is the puppet of the United States. Sadly, I mean, it's trying to get out from under that, but it is being used. It is being used. It is suffering energy losses. It is going to have potentially food shortages. It has magnesium shortages. It has massive inflationary problems. It has refugee problems. It has nuclear threats from hypersonic Russian nuclear missiles, the world's largest and most advanced military that is threatening it. And the U.S. is not able to get it the gas that it needs. Europe lives, I would argue. There's a reason why the British, and the French and etc. Have to kind of live in their past, in like games like this, because they're not looking like they're having much of a future. They're not actually able to operate their own independent policy, foreign policy or otherwise. They vassals of the United States, right? When Merkel gets her phone tapped, by the U.S. Pentagon and the D.C., she says, "I'm sorry, I'll speak up louder next time so that Mike Pompeo can hear everything I'm saying." The majority. I was just listening to a German anti-war, anti-imperialist person say, majority of Germany is against this escalation war, funding and arming anyone in Ukraine. We want to stop this violence. And that doesn't matter though, because Germany doesn't have a democracy. The German leadership go along with whatever the United States says. They're trying to get out of that. But they haven't. They have not yet. And so you have to go back in history. You have to go back in history to a time when you dominated the world. You have to go back in time to when the United States was just a small little, a bunch of upstart criminals and very prudish, very strange, extremist, Calvinist, religious nut jobs, which the U.S. still is, dying by 90% of which from their own stupidity, and just getting wiped out on Roanoke, and then genociding, settler colonizing the United States, of course. But Europe was on top of the United States. Europe was above the United States, right? Or above in a kind of gross term. And so this domination of the world was still deeply European. Technically it's still Euro settler colony if we talk on the United States. But the United States is in the position where Britain had the United States as a colony, as a vassal, as a subordinate in the beginning of the 1800s. Now the United States owns Britain, and the United States tells Britain, sacrifice your children, sacrifice your livelihoods, sacrifice your NHS on the altar of our profit, on our power. Now, of course, Britain's oligarchies benefit from this as well, and a lot of European military arms dealers do very well. Macron and his friends are doing very well. Not so much to the people there. Not that they've ever really been doing incredibly well, but technically they've been doing better than the colonized were. But they've always been extreme inequalities there. But now it's looking increasingly, especially with the current crisis in Ukraine, which is part of why I chose this game right now, is that the Europeans, they are at a crossroads. They have to really start choosing. They have to really dig deeper than they've had to. Because the United States, again, the United States uses and allies with, and then when it's convenient to help the country, it will help you, it will work with you, and as soon as it's convenient for the United States to throw you under the bus to make a lot of money and get you all killed, starved, losing your economic and your security, and get nuked, the United States will throw you under the bus. This is a lesson that Europeans are learning. If they didn't know it, now they're learning it. The United States, look what it did to Afghanistan. Look what it did to Ghani. Look what it did to all of its so-called allies around the world. As soon as it's inconvenient, Juan Guaido, he's not president anymore because we don't need you anymore. Now it's Maduro because it's convenient. The people that it's supposedly helping, it still operates in that way. It's a very imperial way to operate, And the difference is Europe doesn't have an empire anymore, not really. It is now the pet of the United States, and it can't really become an empire again because there's alternatives in the world. So the only option is to get out of imperial fantasy land. And part of that is like if you just keep playing games where you simulate this rise from the backwater to a continent that dominates the world, it colonized the world. To be clear, I mean this is a very Atlantic, which is the rag of empire, the U.S. empire specifically. When you talk about dominating the world, right? It's a very how about genociding, slaughtering, and forcing the world into slavery, extinction, subjugation that lasted centuries, and it was $450 trillion worth of that. How about that? But that's not the way that they're going to phrase this. They're going to phrase this as, well, we got very powerful because we were very good, and might makes right, and we were very rich because, if the Africans were more genetically fit, they would have dominated the world, right? If the Asians weren't so backward and despicable and sick and degenerate, they would have dominated. But we're the best because we're European. So that's obviously that's very racist. Obviously that's very incorrect. Obviously it's very disgusting and colonial and just morally reprehensible. That means that no matter what exact course the game takes, but that's interesting that in this game, no matter what you do, you always consolidate massive centralized states in Europe to global primacy. I would argue that there is a world that could have happened in the 1800s where massive they're not really that big in population, right? But there is a version of the world where less than 10% of the world's population in the western tail of Asia, that's called Europe. It's really, Europe is not really a continent. Europe is part of if anything, it's a Eurasian continent as a landmass, right? If continents are like these large land masses that are usually just barely connected to others by maybe a small a highway, like in Africa there's parts that connect to Asia. US to South America, North America to South America connects by a little bridge, right? But Europe is not like a separate continent with a little bridge. Europe is just this little slice, this little tiny little less than 10% in geographical area of Asia or Eurasia. Europe is a racist construction period. The word Europe, right, is itself a geographical breaking off based on racism. It's not based on actual immutable, it's not based on the natural geological tectonic plate formations in tandem with ocean levels, right? Because as the tectonic plates move, right, certain mountains and basins, mountains will lower and basins will rise, and and different parts of the earth will become above sea level and then beneath. So, and but the Europe itself, it doesn't have any Antarctica is clearly completely separate from all the other continents, right? Africa, mostly separate with little land bridge to Asia, right? North South America, separate. Australia, completely separate from all the other large land masses. Europe is a racist, colonialist construction, I would argue. And you're seeing that playing out as the black, non-white were being left at the borders. Being rejected, right? As NATO tells Libya, you, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? These U.S.-led, Euro military alliance, right? This murder racket, this bomb salesman construction called NATO, lectured Libya and said, after bombing them into the Stone Age, causing slave markets, killing just massive amounts of African people, stopping a actual progressive, actual socialist country with universal healthcare, with universal education, with African monetary fund, leading non-colonial, non-debt trap-based methods of development. And the U.S. and Europe bombed Libya into the Stone Age. France specifically, France making a lot of money and resources from Libya specifically, not wanting them to get out from under the shackles, right? And then NATO lectured Libya and said, when the Libyans were asking, hey, can we have some data about who was bombed and where, so we can know the civilian, talking about civilian casualties in Ukraine. Libya asked her, can we have some information about where your French and American jets dropped the bombs, so that we can know some numbers of these civilian casualties, the bombing of hospitals and schools. And you know what the NATO lawyer said? We're not going to give you anything, because you know why? Because the countries of NATO are civilized countries. Only savage countries commit war crimes. Suggesting that African countries are savage, Iraq is savage, brown countries are savage. But the NATO countries commit no war crime ever. The United States has never committed a war crime. That was in like the late 2010s. That was the justification they used to give you nothing. Obviously that's ultra racist, but that's part of this concept. That's part of the problem of making and playing games and movies, watching movies, reading books, history books, or New York Times bestseller fiction books. Doesn't really matter. Your John Le Carre bullshit about how the Cold War was amazing, freedom, human rights, and democracy bringing exercise, right? This is all part of the problem. When you consume imperial fantasy, you become what they call, another term for this is historical amnesia. You become a historical amnesiac. When you play imperial fantasy, you become an imperial stormtrooper for the present day 2022 empire. When you indulge in racist, colonialist simulations, films, narratives, tabletop RPGs, or CRPGs, or whatever, or JRPG if they make some others. Japan has its own rising fascism backed by U.S. funded right-wing and military-industrial complex interests. When you play and you engage in those, it builds in your mind. Like they're saying in this part of this article, it's about the history professors going, not that I don't think they're particularly good in the West, to be honest, but even them going, wow, there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of inconsistency in these students that are playing all of these imperial fantasy games. And when you play Call of Duty, that literally rewrote Fallujah, I believe. In one of the games, they rewrite like a major, like one of the biggest days of killing of civilians in Iraq during the Iraq War, and they rewrite in the video game, in this super popular video game. Again, twice as many people play video games and watch movies, and there's more people that are reading books. In this video game, they rewrite the war crimes of slaughtering of innocent civilians in Iraq as a Russian war crime. And like how, again, completely ahistorical. those are the kind of things that historians who are, again, I think that they're not purposefully like just making up whole cloth falsities in their University of Michigan or Swedish University or Oxbridge classes. I don't think they're just making up whole cloth stuff, but they do selectively choose what to say and what not to say, and some of the stuff is based on stuff that was made up, and that's problematic. But in the video games, they're just like, well, let's just rewrite all of the Iraq War, let's rewrite Afghanistan. Not that the West isn't constantly doing this. I have whole 6-hour streams about Western illusory historiography, which Voltaire, and I love pointing this out because Voltaire was a European. Voltaire was a French thinker who was imprisoned and exiled for even suggesting that there were lies and fictions in their historiography, in the history, and then he was just imprisoned. Rather than investigate and address those, Louis XIV just put him in the stocks, and threatened him. You keep saying stuff like, I'm going to kill you. Kind of like Assange and Manning, and bringing to light basic truth, and then you just get wiped out. You just disappear. The important truths. You're never gonna have a job. You get character assassinated, or sometimes you just get assassinated, like Fred Hampton, or Martin Luther King, or Malcolm X. And then they can come out and say Zelensky, the billionaire-funded puppet who works with Jewish torturing Nazis, is somehow Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. But anyway, that's part of the imperial fantasy. It's like LARPing justified imperial warfare with Zelensky, with the Azov. People like signing up, people going to Ukraine, Americans, French, UK, former Iraq troopers who are used to just slaughtering a bunch of brown people, in Iraq and Libya and Afghanistan and in Syria, going to Ukraine and getting their ass kicked by denazifying Russians. And not to say that, again, that justifies an invasion, but they were living imperial fantasies, and then they're all of a sudden discovering, oh my god, actual warfare against a competent military like the Russian military. If one thing you will say, the Russians are well-trained, professional, and competent at their jobs. Don't take my word for it. Go ask Scott Ritter, or ask a professional U.S. Former Marine and military intelligence inspector and strategist who directly fought, and his job was to study and devise strategy against Russian military. Anyway, so when you live in imperial fantasy, you end up showing up in Ukraine, and then you're like, oh my god, hey guys, the Russians blew up our base. They're cutting up my passport. I'm stuck in Ukraine, and I'm like surrounded by all these fascists, Nazis, and I'm actually a black soldier, and now they're like chasing black people around and killing them, beating them for being black, and Jewish people are being tortured, like strung up and having their toenails ripped out with pliers. Oh my god, man, I didn't because you were living in a power fantasy, because you were living in an imperial power fantasy, right? In Iraq, you weren't really fighting a war. You were conducting a massacre. You were conducting a slaughter, right? And now you're having to fight an actual one, and it's like, yeah, actually, but you suck because you're soft, because you don't stand or fight for anything, when you fight for the West and its empire. Anyways, so let's go back to the story though. Let's go back to our little story though. The game uses a mechanic of institutions, such as the printing press and the Enlightenment, which appear in a preset order at 50-year intervals, almost always in Europe, before slowly spreading around the world. I have problems with this as well because the Enlightenment did happen, but much of this was based on stolen technology from Asia and the indigenous peoples of the rest of the world, including especially Turtle Island for the Constitution. But anyways, without these institutions, new technologies can be adopted only at much greater cost, meaning that over the centuries, Europe slowly pulls ahead of the rest of the world technologically. Players taught that what made Europe exceptional was the adoption of these institutions, which allowed technological growth to flourish and thereby gave European countries the advantage they used to dominate the world. I would argue specifically military technologies. It's not really that they advanced in all technologies. They specifically came back with stolen Chinese black powder, which was celebratory, and brought it back as weaponized cannons and flintlock, and then later machine gun guns to slaughter people. That's the technology. They're not really that good at anything. They had slightly faster ships, but mostly it was about military technologies that they had. It was about taking non-military, peaceful technologies that are benefiting all of society and people and their material needs, and then making them into weapons, taking those technologies and making weapons of war. That's why the U.S. is a weapons arms dealer. But the West has always been the leading in weapons arms dealing. And then fomenting extremism, fomenting strife, fomenting violence to get everyone killed, to sell more weapons, maintain an oligarchy, an unjust oligarchy, right? It's about disinformation, right? Which is, we don't need to have all these inter-ethnic strife, inter-religious strife, Catholic killing Protestant. You don't need to have all this, right? Nasty, brutish, short life. But that is manufactured so that a tiny minority of people can have their tea and crumpets, their $400 million diamonds, right? Live the high life, and everyone else can suffer. So they have the priests used to do the mass disinformation for their divine, to manufacture consent for divine right. And now CNN and NED and the public and private and charter school systems of the West manufacture consent for Western liberal capitalist democracy, which isn't. So that a handful of billionaires can sip their tea and everyone else can complain about how they're not a millionaire yet. But the technologies are not, the printing press, the technologies I would argue they were specifically barbaristic murder technology that Europe excelled at, right? And made too much of. They're still making too much of it. The U.S. settler colony is making way too much. Europeans are forced to buy billions. I was just listening to a German and another French person was talking about, we had to buy billions of dollars of weapons, and we're no safer than we were before. We're like wasting all of our money buying these Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman American arms manufacturer weapons, and they don't work properly. And now we're poorer for that, and we're also more threatened. Our security is not getting better because now we have this conflict that's been drummed up by U.S.-led NATO, spilling refugees, causing the loss of our energy, our Nord Stream Russian fuel, which is 40% of our electricity. We can't run our factories. How am I gonna lose my job? How is this? A handful of people are making $1 million in Berlin, right? Doing the bidding of lobbying the German government and forcing down the throat of our political leaders U.S. military strategy and making us fund and arm Ukraine and other whatever the U.S. wants. But at the same time, like, a handful of people are getting rich in high places in Germany, but lots of us are. How am I going to have my job at this pencil factory or the Volkswagen factory, or making this insulin pump or whatever I do, because Germany has a lot of manufacturing? How am I going to have the electricity for my IT office, where I'm running this software company, if we have 40% of our energy cut off, and all of a sudden, because they're actually shutting factories down now in Europe because they're short on electricity. They already were short on Chinese magnesium and other products because of the U.S. forcing them Europe to go along with the new Cold War / hybrid war, hopefully not hot war on China. And now you have these major disruptions in their supply chains and their vital energy needs. So that's not helping Europe. That's not helping Germany. Most of them. That's why actually most Germans are against this war and aggression and military and confrontations against to the east towards Russia. Building up funding and arming billionaire U.S.-funded fascist dictatorships, and U.S. With Nazi-led dictatorships. The Azov is destroyed, but there's still extremist nationalism, ultra-nationalism, and extreme right-wing elements all over Ukraine. And the Germans are actually against that, but that doesn't matter because they don't have a democracy. They have whatever the United States tells them they're going to have. Just like Taiwan, you're gonna do whatever we say, or we'll put someone else in there that will. It's not as extreme as Ukraine was. Like, they literally couped the country after an election and installed, with John McCain, Republicans and Democrats handing out cookies to people with swastikas, right? Victoria Nuland specifically in the Biden administration was said, fuck the EU. She literally said, right, speaking of the pan-European project, speaking of this unified Europe, the United States current Biden administration cabinet member Victoria Nuland, specifically a neocon, specifically said fuck the EU when Germany and France tried to broker a peace and a democratic election, right? And in Maidan, after this crisis in the early 2010s, France and Germany tried to have a peaceful election to restabilize things and have some kind of legitimate democratic government with some kind of democratic legitimacy. And the U.S. said, "Fuck the EU." They backed the far right. They funded and armed them, and they said, "We will give you political cover." Victoria Nuland is on the phone, is on record saying, "Fuck the EU. We're gonna put the neo-Nazi in power. Yachts is the guy. They're handpicking and selecting the neoliberal IMF/World Bank/Harvard economists trained managers to plunder the resources for the benefit of the U.S. Highest elites in Wall Street." And they said, "Fuck the EU. I don't care what Germany and France want. I don't care if they want some kind of peace, democracy, and more neutral, peaceful countries on their border. Fuck the EU." So this is the way the U.S. actually think. They're going to tell Europe, "Oh yeah, we're going to help you out. We're going to give you some energy. We're going to send you some fracking from frack juice." We'll send you some of our American electricity. Fun fact: fracking actually, it's 12 times more expensive. What you used to get when you drill in the ground in Texas in the 1950s, you could get hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil out of a single site, and it's very low cost. It pays itself back easily, and it's high grade, generally high grade, high quality, fossil fuel. Not that we want a lot of fossil fuels, but you do need energy. The fracking, it's 12 times more expensive. You actually you don't break even, not even close. You need like billions of dollars of subsidies to even to give the facade that you're making any money at all. You're not making any money fracking. But America and the fracking, the quality of the fuel that comes out is so thin and so just low grade that it's not even appropriate for jets, period. So they couldn't store it in Red Hill fuel tanks even if they wanted to, not that they should, but because it wouldn't fuel the F-35s, the F-16s, the broken F-35s, I should say, that they want to fly and blow up China with. Or the Belt and Road. So anyway, but that's 3 digressions in. Let's go back to Europe. The player is taught that the player is taught in this game. So what we're talking about before I went off on that was Europa Universalis. The player is taught that what made Europe exceptional was the adoption of these institutions, which allowed technological growth to flourish and thereby gave European countries the advantage they used to dominate the world. Want to play as non-European and still succeed? You had better be willing to kill, conquer, and colonize. In other words, do what Europeans did. Europa Universalis, like most Paradox games, rewards playing. I mean, that's pretty messed up. But anyways, Europa Universalis, like most Paradox games, rewards playing in a ruthless, expansionist way. So this is the thing that anybody who is watching this, I'm gonna just minimize this a little bit for a second. You're looking at walls of text. I'm sorry. Anybody who is watching this, if you are a game developer, if you work at a game studio, if you're a storyteller, you're writing for Call of Duty. If you're writing for Battlefield Blow Up the Belton Road, Battlefield 2042. If you're writing storylines, right, and game design for any small or big company, tabletop, computer, visual novel, whatever, VR games. There needs to be more, I think, creative thinking into how the games, especially the most popular games, are structured. And this idea, because this is a problem I struggle with myself. I say this as somebody who struggles with this question. How do you make games whose like meta story, whose ludo narrative, right? Like ludo means like ludo narrative is the story being told by the actions that you're doing, as opposed to the story being told by pixelated anime character cutscenes. Like all your base belong to us. Like that's a different. That's some deep 2000s internet lore. But you know, I mean, the story that's being told in the cutscenes versus what you're doing, right? Like when you're playing RPGs, they're murder hobo games. That's a joke. It's not really a joke though. That's actually what you're doing. You're going around and you're just killing things, they're looting the bodies of kobolds, goblins, you know, silly mushrooms, with fangs, you know, Koopas. Well, you don't loot the Koopas, but you know, in RPGs, you're going around, you're killing things, you're taking their stuff, and then you're taking the gold, you're gaining experience, you're gaining magic missiles, fire number 2, you know, meteor shower number 7, and then you're killing bigger things and you're taking their stuff. It's imperial. It's fundamentally imperial, right? It's about conquest, domination. It's the United States Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, or any of these other empires as a single person, or maybe a party of 5 with you and Barrett and Iris, you know, or your other Final Fantasy little sprites, you know, or your Elden Ring and you and your friends, you know. I haven't played Elden Ring, so I don't know, but you know, it's about you killing, lying, cheating. Well, you don't really do much lying necessarily, but you're killing, you're stealing, you're taking, whether the person deserves it, likes it or not, and then you're making yourself bigger and more powerful to kill more stuff, take more stuff, and become bigger and more powerful. So this is what they all did, right? Britain was small, cold, wet island. China was 30 times the economy. It killed a lot of indigenous people in Africa. It enslaved India and made them all the coolies, right? It got opium and it trafficked that into China. It sucked wealth and resources out of Africa, right, and the Americas as well. And then a few of them got a few of the professional resource extractors got upset and decided to make their own empire. That's the United States. Well, they're both Anglo. And then they built and they grew and they got bigger guns and bigger weapons with the resources that they stole, and then they got bigger, and then they killed more people with their bigger gunships and the bigger warships and their bigger hegemony. And then they got bigger guns, Gatling guns, right? And so the strategy game actually began in the 1800s with Germans practicing for war against other empires. And then they were in strategy games, RPG games, all Western games actually are based around conquest in some way or another. If you look very close, chess itself is a game of expending your most insignificant 99%. You know, like We Are the 99%, Occupy Wall Street, you know, tax the rich, you know, valid sentiments, of course, but, you know, taking your pawns, the masses of people, getting them all killed, right? Like Europe is America's pawn in the game of chess that it's playing right now. Get all of your French and German and all of your gaslit, too much Call of Duty playing, too much Iraq War, Muslim slaughtering children, right? Your poor and middle class kids, to go into Ukraine, get yourself killed, right? America's gonna fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. This is actually America's strategy in Afghanistan as well. The CIA did, like, we will fight Russia and China. We will start a land war in Asia and fight Russia and China to the last Afghani. We're gonna fight Afghan person. We're gonna fight China to the last Libyan. That's really what that's ultimately, in a certain sense, about. And those are the pawns. The pawns are all the Ukraine people. The pawns are all of Europe. You're all pawns. The pawns are all of Afghanistan. The pawns are all of the Vietnamese. We're gonna fight China to the last Vietnamese, right? To stop the spread of communism coming down from the 1.4 billion person communist country China down into Vietnam, into Korea. We're gonna fight China to the last Korean. 2 million killed in this bloody war. All of the country blown up, so that Western journalists said there's nothing left to blow up. Everything gone. Hospitals, railroads, stores, general stores, preschools, playgrounds, gone. Everything craters. Laos, gone. We're gonna fight China. We're gonna fight communism to the last Laotian. We're gonna fight China to the last, you know, we're gonna fight China to the last Indian if they can manage it. We're gonna get them all riled up. We're gonna fund with NATO and Mark Zuckerberg, who works to promote digital cyber mass disinformation through Facebook posts, far-right promoted posts in India to get Modi's 1 billion person country lined up with American hegemony. We're gonna fight China with India to the last Indian. So that chess is still being played today. It's called the world is America's pawn. Every country is America's pawn. America's people is America's pawn. Every American, we will fight Russia and China to the last American. I mean, we don't care. I mean, to the last peasant. You know, because if you have a net worth under 10 million and you don't have Victoria Nuland and Mr. Bezos on speed dial, you're nobody. You're just some peasant. So you can go die. You know, of lack of health care from your COVID-19, or go be expended as excess population in Ukraine. Go sign up and go kill yourself over there with the Nazis. So chess is still being played in the in the world, but it's no longer a European power that is the king and the queen. You know, even Queen Elizabeth herself is getting rebutted, rebuffed, and violently. Well, not violently. I would say assertively educated, as her children show up in Jamaica and they tell, no, you're not our head. You're not going to be our head of state anymore. Also apologize for slavery. Oh, you don't want to? Well, why don't you just go back to your cold, wet rock? But America, you know, the U.S., so that's why Britain does whatever America says and writes its war propaganda for it, because America can't read or write. 54% can't read above a junior high level. So Britain has to write all of the propaganda for America, and then they get a cut in return. That's all they do in the city of London. They sip tea in 200-story bank towers. They sip tea. They rig LIBOR. They write arms dealer propaganda about China bad, and you know something weaker or something, and then they you know they have a lot of sex like in IT Crowd, and then they cradle into the wing of the eagle, the United States, and they fuck their own people over. That's what they do in London. So because you know they had 160,000 austerity deaths in Britain. They actually had a declining income by 25%. When America was flat, the UK was declining. So they're doing UK and Australia as they're kind of like US used to be the satellite of the UK. Now US is the Death Star, and UK and Australia are the satellites doing America's bidding. You know, in AUKUS, the UK and the AU. Right, the UK and the AU, they're all like, oh, please, America, please promote me from a pawn to a knight, or maybe a knight to a rook. That's what they are. They're like UK and AU are like the rooks and the knights, and you know, and all of European countries are all the pawns. They're just being slaughtered, or not being slaughtered, but they're getting real screwed. Anyways, enough of that metaphor. But my point is that strategy games, chess itself, RPGs actually began as Pentagon war games, but RPGs specifically were war games that are played out to simulate warfare during World War II and then in the Cold War. That's where those games come from. And the 4X games, obviously, deeply ultra colonial, space imperialism, right? You know, and these historical games like Europa Universalis is history imperial, and a lot of it is, if you know, I think a lot of this is while you could learn things about history, in reinforcing this idea that the European colonial era, right, and the European barbaristic era is universal to humanity. That even the title, it's very problematic title to me, because those aren't universal, right? The native Hawaiians didn't do this. The Chinese didn't do this, right? Not at the scale, not in the way that the Europeans did. The peoples of Turtle Island, indigenous peoples there didn't do it. The African peoples didn't do these things, right? The indigenous peoples of the world. That's why I have all these panels, right, of indigenous peoples and BIPOC, Black indigenous people of color, speaking, you know, another version of this story. And I don't think the process was not inevitable, you know. If part of these were failures on the part of China, you know, as the world's largest, and now they have historically been, along with India, the two largest and most powerful blocks economically, technologically. China, especially China, technologically, in terms of sophistication of the art, culture, it was the center of the world. It was the most dynamic place in the world in for a long time. Part of it was internal mistakes, the Qing specifically, miscalculations that they made about who the Europeans were. If they had calculated differently, like if China had said, oh my goodness, the Europeans are not going to simply listen to ethical pleas to the morality of Queen of England specifically, but also France. If the Chinese had taken the threat of Europe more seriously and said we don't want to become like warmongers and colonizers, right? But what we have to do is we have to build our military and our defenses strong enough to withstand specifically naval ship attacks with cannons and very fast vessels, and these large numbers and trained armies of the British Navy, of the French Navy, etc. And we're gonna need to do that, because if we don't do that, they're gonna come in, they're gonna kill tens of thousands of us, and they're gonna force the opium in, and we're gonna be subjugated, and then we'll lose for a century or who knows how long, So if the Chinese they have their military, they have nuclear weapons. The Russians, of course, they figured out you have to have a military, you have to have weapons, you have to have some kind of military alliances, because there are people who are willing and will slaughter and kill you, enslave you, subjugate you, degrade you, and take your resources and impoverish you, right? And as long as there are people like that, because the thing is, in the pre-colonial times, there were not such depths of depravity and mass violence, I would argue. Not at that kind of scale. Like peaceful cooperation and non-violent solutions to most problems, not all, but to many situations, were dominating, for much of the earth. And then the Europeans, who internally were very violent, spread out to the rest of the world, right? And that's really the issue. But if the Chinese had armed up faster and been able to withstand, if they said, we have to modernize our military, we have to modernize our defenses, we have to understand these British and French better than we do, it was a little not lazy, but it was just a little bit of miscalculation and probably a little bit of hubris. Well, the thing is, Chinese did actually have, the Europeans even knew this, the Chinese had more literature, more art, more technology, more production. They had 4,000 years of this in one summer palace. Victor Hugo wrote about it, right? So they did have some reason to kind of feel not necessarily above the Europeans, but they underestimated the ruthlessness of the Europeans. And if they hadn't underestimated it, there might not be as much of a colonial era, because China might have been building the Belt and Road, the New Silk Road, in the 1800s. Hawaii was already, guys, I often bring up, Hawaii was the beginning of, Hawaii was the most successful, well, Hawaii in the 1800s, after China fell, was the most successful anti-imperialist, technologically advanced socialist country on earth. And Hawaii was closely allied in a lot of ways with China. The father of modern China, Sun Yat-sen, began the undoing of this colonial subjugation of China from the Xinjiang revolutionary, I talk about this often, but revolutionary movements and organizations in the diaspora that came back to China and began the process of undoing the colonial relationships. And now China is helping to undo as the number one enemy of the United States, right? It's not Europe, it's not Russia, actually, it's not any other power, right? The number one enemy of the United States is China. There's a reason for that. There's a deep historical reason for that goes thousands of years back. But if Hawaii and China had been able, and Kalakaua was actually building an anti-imperial alliance, trying to get the rest of Oceania, what was called then, he had ideas for the Empire of Oceania. Now, they were calling a lot of things empires at the time, because that's all it was. But what they wanted was an anti-imperial, in the sense of win-lose, subjugation, murderous, extractive, for a tiny minority of the population. Kalakaua wanted to build a Silk Road of all of the Pacific peoples, Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, Philippines, right, where the U.S. was also investigating and fighting wars against Spain too, and so that if that had happened, if there was an Asia Pacific anti-imperial bloc that built out because China wasn't subjugated, you could have skipped much of the 20th century and gone straight to where China is now. You know, there is a version of the world that starts to look more like that. You know, but you know, and that you know, if you are designing a video games, or maybe just one. I'm designing video games too at the same time. But anyway, if you're making a game, if you assume, I mean, coming back to this article, right? So you have to play in a ruthless expansionist way, right? And you have to kill, you have to conquer, and you have to colonize. And the games are suggesting, because it's giving you, like, you know, making someone believe that they're coming to their own conclusion is a powerful part of Western technology of advanced disinformation. You know, if you just tell someone the U.S. is good, that most people who have like basic skills to survive in the modern world with enough education to know how to, like, you know, figure out how many semiconductors and where exactly to place them into a Boeing 737 or a vehicle, or, you know, to survive in the real world. If you just tell someone America's good, you know, it's good, period. That doesn't convince people, right? What you have to say is China is violating the human rights of these Uyghur peoples, and the United States stands. You know, you have to give them something that makes them feel like they're coming to a conclusion, and you have to give them, like, yes, the United States has had has had some racism problems, and blacks were enslaved, and the Democratic Party you know, hasn't been as good as it has, but, you know, and you have to kind of like, you have to pretend like you're giving them rational arguments and information, but you're always leading them in a certain way in the ultimate in the ultimate meta narrative. And often it's better to bake what you really want to say into the details in the story, right? Like in a Wire article about artificial intelligence and self-driving cars, you just say, you know, you talk about the trolley problem, and while techno nerds who are obsessed with pulling levers on cartoon trolley apparatuses, because that's what dorks from the West like to do, is just fantasize about killing 3 nurses or 6 nuns all day long. That's all they do at Google University. I'm just kidding, but, you know, that is a thing. It's like trying to figure out, like, when the self-driving car can avert this one hitting one, you know, person or 3 criminals, which should it choose? Anyways, and then while you're focusing on the trolley problem, you just drop in, and in Venezuela, where everyone is starving and worship authoritarian regimes that are starving their people and slaughtering all their people with AK-47s, you know, the Venezuelan people chose always to avert the vehicle. They told the self-driving car to avert one rich man to hit 10 poor people. Now, what you're doing there is, while people are focusing on the self-driving car concept, you're putting what the point of all Wired articles and all Western media is, because Wired is part of that. You know, all you know, corporate-controlled, you know, lifestyle puff piece, you know, sculpture enthusiast vehicle. Motor vehicle magazines. This is what the purpose of them, as the part of the world as a jukebox of the CIA's disinformation campaign, which it will be complete when everything that the West believes is false, is about. It's about telling you that it's about dropping that little bit of, everyone knows it. It's common sense. Common sense is whatever the CIA says. Common sense is imperial propaganda. That's what common sense is. Everyone knows that Venezuela is full of dictatorships and authoritarian regimes because communism killed 100 trillion people with Stalin Marx. Stalin Marx, just like, he really was a nasty guy, that Stalin Marx. Oh my God. Holy shit. It was like postmodern neo-genocide. Postmodern neo-Marxist genocide. That's what communism is. So you know that, right? It's common sense. And so when they put that in the article, it slots Venezuela into the common sense CIA, you know, the actual imperial information warfare information. And so then you feel like you are a smart person. You're a smart person because now you understand about self-driving cars. Now you know how self-driving cars work. It's just about pulling levers on trolleys, right? And telling a bunch of if-else statements inside of a supercomputer that's a septillion times slower than China, because they suck at making supercomputers in the West. It's the kindergarten cyber. You know, I was just talking to a CIO the other day. It's like, well, it's, you know, the West has kindergarten cyber warfare tools compared to China, so you might want to not fuck around. Never mind the hypersonic missiles that can take out every city in Europe with conventional warfare. So hope you look forward to not having any more Oktoberfests in Berlin. But anyways, and in Paris and in London. So when you have a informational, when you're trying to give your story, you don't tell the story like, and America is the greatest country in the world, and Venezuela is very bad and we should invade it and take its oil. That doesn't sound good. No, what you do is you tell a story completely you talk about something completely oblique, unrelated to what you want to say, right? And you slip the information in the juicy details, in the side details, right? That's where the real story is. The real story is one story. It's called "We have to take and crush Venezuela by installing Juan Guaido and backing the far right and getting Maduro undone and stopping socialism and killing 40,000 Venezuelans with sanctions in 2019." And that's the real story. But you can't tell them that. What you have to do is you have to say it's an authoritarian, tanky, communist, Stalin, Marx, trillion-person killing regime, and self-driving cars are cool, dude. Hey, here's the thing about LiDAR that's really neat and fun, man. Wow. I feel really smart now because I read this article about self-driving cars, and all of the automated super intelligence that goes into and also you tell this story about how you're very competent at making super intelligence, but you're not because you suck because you're from the West, which is literally 12 zeros, over 12 zeros of magnitudes slower and behind the East. So that's what the articles are for. It's pretending like you know what you're doing, pretending like you're not crashing your 737 Boeing Supermaxes because you're underpaying the advanced adversarial AI programmers not enough to make competent AI. You're not paying your engineers that are bolting the nuts and screws into your planes. You're not paying all of your basic scientists and technologists enough to competently manufacture without sleep deprivation because of overwork and crunch at the Boeing factory in Washington, right? And that's what the article is about. It's pretending like you are some kind of competent civilization with bridges that aren't collapsing and killing Joseph Biden's constituents because you don't maintain your basic infrastructure, right? And Europe also is falling behind. They're way behind. They're eons behind China, actually, even in so-called advanced Europe, because they need to buy more broken missiles that the THAAD Korean missile defense system is gonna help stop the counter missiles of, right? And they're gonna sell some THAADs to Germany probably. Hey, Germany buys $55 trillion worth of THAADs, right? Because the thing is, that's what Europe has to realize, that it is the new pawn. So anyway. So, but also, that narrative is not a good narrative. There should be like another game where you can there should be like a game, there should be a game called like Imperial versus Indigenous, or something, or Imperial versus Win-Win, right? And so you can build an Imperial world, yes, with a British Empire that lasts another 100 years. With I don't know, the Swedish come out. This is a Swedish game because the Swedish are like, what if we were even more ruthless and more barbaric than the British and the French? Maybe we could run the world, right? That's what Finland's doing. Finland's going, yay, America, we love you. We're gonna have Nazi flags all over our nurseries and our downtown stores, and then we're gonna send weapons to neo-Nazis. Because we love you, America, because we all want to be you. We want to go back and make Finland great and full of fascism again. We want to just be full of fucking Nazis and slaughter the world, just like we did for hundreds of years. We want to go back. Nazis is about longing for colonial racist genocide. That's what Nazism is about, longing for the 1800s. That's what it really is about, It's about make the Euro settler colonial conquistadors, right? Conquestors, dominators, slaughterers, like Columbus, who poured boiling soap down the throats of indigenous people when they didn't bring him enough gold. It's about making the West colonial again. That's what Nazis are about. They're not, and they're gonna start with anti-Semitism. They start with slaughtering the Russian. They start with, dipping their bullets in pig fat so they can kill orcs, Muslims, right? they call Muslims orcs because because Tolkien was an imperial fantasist who killed the dark men of the East in his books, which is where dark evil comes from, Mordor, from the East. Right? In the Monroe Doctrine, Mordor is Venezuela in the South, right? Where the authoritarian, despotic, right? Tyrannical, children starving, right? No, it's the U.S. starving them. No, like Cuba, authoritarian, tyrannical, horrific, right? So there should be an alternative to the imperial fantasy. It should be the imperial fantasy, but you could have like imperial or win-win. Like choose between conquest and annihilation and genocide and enslavement and degradation and subjugation, right? Or win-win cooperation, right? And struggle between these two versions of civilization through 500 years of human history or something. You know, that would be a more interesting game. That doesn't necessarily it doesn't remove and tell falsities about the history of the West, because there's still a lot, even in these games, about the inevitability and the universality of the European barbaric colonial era. But it gives you optional ways that looks at actual history of what was actually happening in, Asia, like what was actually happening in Asia, not what Western people with degrees from fucking Oxbridge who tell Luna Oi, let me see your hands, farm girl, in a sexist and racist way, right? Who still, people with history degrees from Harvard and Yale and from French, and Adrian Zhang, who has a German degree, who is a fucking Nazi, who is a degree in statistics. He's Adrian. You don't know who Adrian Zhang is, real quick. You should learn who he is, because he's gonna come back once America turns back to attacking China. Adrian Zhang is a German anthropologist and statistician. His degree is specifically on statistical and data analysis. Works for the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and he literally makes up numbers whole cloth. He has a degree from a German university. So again, I don't know exactly what kind of quality education you guys are putting out there, or are you just like pumping out professional liars, cheaters, stealers, and murderers for the U.S. to use and weaponize against China? I don't know what kind of, he literally said that women and gay people are less than men, they're subhuman. And he also said that Jews should be burnt and melted down in a pit in hell if they don't remove their Jewishness. So he's anti-Semitic, like actually for real, like deeply. And he said they will burn in hellfire and they'll be forged through pain and incineration into good Christians. That's Adrian Zhang, and he's the #1 source for the Uyghur genocide story. So that's the kind of people that, again, I'm just saying, this is the kind of people that come out of your universities. He has an accredited degree. He has a university degree from an accredited German college. So again, I'm not saying that everybody in Germany is Adrian Zhang, but the people that actually get jobs and the people that are moving on, and there is the alternative for Deutschland. So and there's a reason why people like him keep showing up and then keep popping up and keep running Germany to keep selling weapons, right? And keep supporting the U.S. because Germany is still supporting U.S. policy. There's a lot of people that one general, I think one military officer in Germany stood up in this time and said, maybe we shouldn't be funding and arming neo-Nazis and poking the bear in Russia. Maybe we should like try to negotiate and deal in diplomacy and respect our Russian neighbors that we have thousands of years of history. And he was shouted out of the room and he lost his job. So that's the whatever and the thing is, a lot of people in Germany are like, we don't want this, but that's not who operates the country. Who operates the country is Western capitalists, Western U.S. oligarchy, and the military-industrial complex. That's who operates Germany for you. And that's who also apparently operates, these kind of people. So this, anyway, so back to this though. The player thought that what was made Europe exceptional was adoption of these institutions with technology. Yeah, so there should be options of like, maybe the world. Actually, let me take this. This music is scaring me. Sorry, I have the entire Neofeud. What you're listening to is the entire Neofeud soundtrack. But anyways, which I composed, by the way. So, yeah. So, but so like there should be an option. Like, let me get my Twitter thread just as an example. Right? There should be an option. Something I recently found out is that one side of my family actually directly supported the freeing of 400 million people. So did you know that? Silver Spook, my ancestors personally like liberated 500 million people. Did you know that? That's why I'm so based. No. But Sun Yat-sen is a person who is called the father of modern China. Sun, I bring this person up often because it's important. Sun is from Hawaii, where lived and was raised, and most impactful years of his life by Sun Yat-sen's own words. He was a Chinese person, but he was raised in Hawaii. And he began to what I'm speaking of now. China is the center of the win-win cooperative world. You know, you can ask Africa, ask Evo Morales, right? Ask South and Central America, ask Cuba, ask the U.S. They will tell you. You know, well, they'll tell you China is the leader of the authoritarian dictatorship, communist, murderous hell world, right? But I mean that tells you what you need to know, which is the opposite, which is China is not necessarily everything, but it is the enemy because China is actually very much for historical and cultural and just because of the history of the world. It was kind of inevitable that this was going to happen, and that in a certain sense, not inevitable, but it was very likely that China would be the leader of the global anti-imperialist, socialist, win-win cooperative, non-colonial global order, right? And so that's why, and so Sun Yat-sen, in the time of the degradation of China, as I bring up, Sun Mei was Sun Yat-sen's older brother, right? And Sun Mei came to Hawaii as a rancher, right? Because of the degradation of China. Let me see if I was reading a bunch of this history. It's actually kind of interesting. It ties directly into this. Let's see if I can find that one. Yeah. So, in this time, Sun's eldest siblings, right? Two uncles, Sun Sui-cheng and Sun Guan-cheng, had earlier gone to seek their fortune in the Californian goldfields. So, because of this time, right, of the Opium Wars was first half of the 1800s, right? The Opium Wars were major turning points, right? And that whole period, right, was a major turn when China went from the #1 economy, 30 times bigger than the U.S., many times bigger than the UK, to suddenly the UK and the US surpassing China, right? And they're falling into decay, falling into subjugation. Their leaders unable to get themselves out. The Qing specifically are unable to get China out from under the shackles, like I was saying, of Western colonization, like many other places. But they call it semi-colonized because they weren't fully occupying, not like North Central South America or Africa deeply occupied. But China was subservient though, and exploited and pillaged and plundered by Britain, France, United States. That's why Mr. McKinley says, right, we need to get our share of China. It's because that was about the U.S. ascending into a Euro-colonial superpower, right? So, but Sun Sui-cheng, let me see if I can find this one. Yeah, so two uncles, Sun Sui-cheng and Sun Guan-cheng, had gone earlier to seek their fortune in California. So Sun Yat-sen's uncles had gone to California to try to build a better life because their life was falling apart in China. The traction of better life kept alive for Sun's brothers, and again, the Chinese were mass lynched in all of the West Coast, and they were hated and shunned. They built the infrastructure, and then they were slaughtered by white men with guns, police, and just average American working class people. Yang Wen-na, the brother of Sun's mother, Ni Yang, had a business in Honolulu, and he took Sun Mei back to Hawaii. So Sun Mei is the older brother of Sun Yat-sen. In 1871. Okay, so that's post-Opium Wars, right? Post-Opium Wars, Sun Mei, the older brother of Sun Yat-sen, came to Hawaii. The first verifiable Chinese resident in Hawaii was in 1794, although Chinese community uses 1789 as a commemorative date when perhaps the first Chinese crewman came through. The The early Chinese came in the first ships plying the sandalwood trade routes between the islands. Tangshangshan, the Sandalwood Mountains, and China. About a century later, long after the sandalwood forest had been exhausted, there would be about 46,000 living there. Here, mostly brought in initially as contract laborers. So you see, in the beginning, the Chinese were visiting and engaging in trade, right? And later, the Chinese are moving because China is falling apart, and the opportunities. And I think Sun is from the southeastern part, if I'm not mistaken, which, like Hong Kong, not from Hong Kong, but I believe he's not. Sun wasn't from Hong Kong, but like Hong Kong, right? What happened to Hong Kong? Let's go back to this picture, right? What happened to Hong Kong? Hong Kong, like Hawaii, shares a colonial occupation, ghettoization of the native people. Rich whites enjoyed paradise and used us to continue pillaging China. They used Hawaii to continue pillaging China, like I said, right? And so Hawaii had the highest literacy rate on earth in electricity before the U.S. China was the world's largest economy. So this is another way that we're tied. But Hong Kong, you see, and then you had a time where the Chinese were, they were not have a perfect life, but they had like some kind of decent livelihoods for themselves and their family, right? And then the Chinese became basically slaves, coolies. The British called the Chinese and Indians. By the way, that's 1/3 of the Earth's population when you put China and India together, right? That's 1/3 of the Earth's population were British slaves. Plus the Africa, right? Indochina, Vietnam was, the French got the cut of, France was like, well, we want some of that too. Now, French did take from China as well, but the French specifically got Vietnam and that whole peninsula down there, right? And that's why Luna always speaks about those freaking French aristocrats that enslaved us and made us into emaciated little Vietnamese children who they tossed little breadcrumbs to and watched us frolic around like starving wild dogs and laughed at us, right? And Luna's family undid that colonial with military conflict. Fought the French colonizers out and then kicked America out, right? That's why I made decolonizers. But the Chinese in Hong Kong became similarly also subservient, and but that didn't just start in this time. That was already beginning, right? In this previous time in the mid 1800s. And so they were coming in the beginning for trade, but then later they became because they were escaping China. They were trying to build a better life because their country was falling apart. And a century later, after the so thanks to the Civil War and the favorable terms of the Reciprocity Treaty, sugar was a lucrative business. The agents were both legally and surreptitiously bringing in thousands of Chinese coolie. Again, it's really a derogatory term. It's not quite the N-word, but Luna told me what it means, but it basically means like not really a person. It's a subhumanizing word. It's like a beast of burden almost, like an animal, like a savage. It's savage, it's like a savage, rice growing, slanty-eyed. I know that's a racist thing, but that's the way that they refer to them. Little worker bee. The Dutch call the Taiwanese the worker bees, and the Chinese are the worker bees, and Taiwan is the land of milk and honey, and they massacred all the Chinese on Taiwan. So that's the history of Taiwan also. When Sun Mei arrived with his uncle, immigration had become unregulated and uncontrolled. There were more Chinese males than Caucasian males due to the large influx of Chinese starting in the early 1870s and lasting into the next decade. So this is an image of Iolani School, which was the Hawaii's first Anglican. I've gone into that history on another stream, so I won't go all into that. But the mother of universal health care, who was a Hawaiian woman, Emma Rook, was the founder of Iolani School. She led the setting up of this school, where Sun Yat-sen attended, right? Sun and his family in the front of the residence in Kuiheng, May 27, 1912, from commemorating Sun Zhongshan. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this. I know I am. I'm not the best at this, but I'm trying to get better. Besides working the sugar plantations, Chinese were involved in rice cultivations, using swampy areas and abandoned taro fields left fallow by declining numbers of Hawaiians succumbing to Western introduced diseases. Very important to remember. When the Chinese arrived, I sometimes bring this point up. The Chinese were not. I would not call them settler colonizers, right? Number one, right? I mean, I have my whole speech about what indigenous means, but when they arrived, right, they were requested to come in part because of decimation of Hawaiian populations, because of disease, and many of these, and I've gone on before, purposefully introduced by white ships lying about the Chinese bringing the disease, but it was actually white crew members infected with smallpox being smuggled into Hawaii, and then they lied about it to cast the blame onto the Chinese while also decimating the Hawaiian population by intentionally bringing in smallpox. So similar to what the indigenous people suffered in North America, you know, when the missionaries and the colonizers brought smallpox blankets and brought disease in to intentionally slaughter and get rid of the indigenous people, and then they come to, oh, look at all this nice cleared land, we've got rid of all of these little bugs. They were people, but you know, that's the way they treated them, as little insects. The Spanish call them mestizo, you know, the mosquitoes, which is all part of the racist colonial history. But anyways, so the Chinese that came in they were requested to come in by the Hawaiians to help with the tending to and cultivation of the land. Right, so rice cultivation using swampy areas and abandoned taro fields left fallow by a declining number of Hawaiians. Sun May first worked on it. So again, when if you requested to come in and help with tending of land, is different from coming in, enslaving the population, massacring the population, planting smallpox blankets to get rid of the population, taking over the land, bringing black slaves on it, right? What the Americans and the capitalists did was they brought Chinese slaves, Chinese coolie slaves to, and also Filipino and then Portuguese, because they had heard of this Haiti thing. So let's diversify our racist. Let's take indigenous people from all over the world instead of just from one part of the world. That's what Hawaii was. The white capitalists brought Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, Hawaiian, some Hawaiian, Portuguese, all together, and made them all distrust each other by inserting and spreading rumors in each group about how the Japanese so stingy to the Hawaiians. Oh, the Filipinos are all dirty to the Chinese. Oh, the Chinese are all cheap. The Hawaiians are over there. They're all a bunch of ogres and they're mean, and you know, they're still there to this day. By the way, my family, inside my own family, that's all gross stuff I've heard. I'm like, where did that come from, auntie? Like 80-year-old auntie. All those Hawaiians, they're all nasty. They're all stealing from us, and they're all mean, and they're all dickheads. And where did you hear that from? She doesn't know, right? It's kind of like how you don't know how you know that there's a Uyghur genocide, but it's because, you know, the same white oligarchy is sticking that in your brain by reading Wired articles or just any Western anything. So the Hawaiian, and when the Chinese brought the Chinese in, or requested the Chinese come in, it was to help tend, and that's why they had Hui, which is a worker cooperative, you know, or working more so than not in cooperation for the mutual benefit of all the people, as opposed to racist capitalism for the disproportionate benefit of the labor value for a tiny minority of people, like in Dole Plantation, right? Thurston Sugar, right? The Big Five, who then backed an overthrow of Hawaii with the U.S. Navy, USS Boston specifically. So again, same story. Weapon, gunboat, so gunpowder, right? The USS Boston was gunpowder. It was Chinese technology of black powder weaponized into a cannon on a ship, and the horrible, ruthless, just despicableness to just threaten entire countries and peaceful peoples so that you can enslave them, destroy them, remove the universal health care. That's, you know, it's the same as China, but on a smaller scale, right? In China, they had to take their gunboats and slaughter 40,000 before the Chinese gave up. In Hawaii, the Queen said, well, we know what you guys did in China. We know what you guys did. The Hawaiians had already read. They understood who the Americans were very well. That's why they survived. They understood who the Europeans were very well. That's why they survived a century as a tiny little nation without being colonized. And they said, well, we don't want to get ourselves we don't want to lose, if the Hawaiians suffer the 40,000 deaths that the Chinese suffered in the Opium Wars, just to make a point, well, we only have like 50,000 Hawaiians left. We will be wiped out. So the Hawaiians chose to not be exterminated. You know, some people go, why didn't Hawaiians just fight? You have to. You don't fight unless you win. You know, it's part of the art of war. You know, Hawaiians had also read. You know, art. They had read the Sun Tzu. They'd study all of this, all the history. You don't fight wars that you're gonna lose. Unless, you know, although if the Hawaiian, this is another way to think about it. There would be no Silver Spook here today because everyone in Hawaiians would just be an actual myth. Because there would be 0 Hawaiians left. There would be no Silver Spook. There would be no possibility of any Hawaiian independent country or just Hawaiian human rights, because there'd be no Hawaiians left. Because Americans would have slaughtered every last Hawaiian, and there'd just be a lot of dead bodies. There'd be a lot of dead bodies, and there'd be a lot more white. The skin tone of people in Hawaii would be a lot lighter, because it would be only white people and some coolie Asians. And that's why there wasn't a battle there, because there was no possibility of the Hawaiians actually fighting. There's not really a possibility of anything at that time. Kalakaua was working on military technology. You know, when I bring up the submarine, you know, in the submarine in Hawaii before 1898, right? The part of the purpose of the submarine that Kalakaua was our leader was inventing, right? They did not exist. It was a military technology, right? If you're unable to be seen by naval ships in the same way that the U-boat and other military submarines became pivotal in world wars, the Hawaiians wanted that underwater vehicle that they could crush the American Boston, the USS Boston, or the British Navy with, potentially, to an extent that they would suffer such devastating loss, despite Hawaii being a smaller country, less power, not that many people. But if the Hawaiians could successfully deter, like, I don't know, a hypersonic missile deterring Germany, France, Britain from going along with NATO, if the Hawaiians had that super advanced technology, or like, I don't know, the cyber warfare division of China making the US look like kindergarten, right? If you can deter the barbarous colonizer with super advanced technology, right? They will make the... Now, you're not going to use it. Again, Russia doesn't have nuclear first strike preemptive. The US's official policy is we will use preemptive nuclear strikes if it benefits our interest, if we feel like it. That is the formal policy. It's been that way for decades. China has no preemptive first strike, only retaliatory. Russia also only retaliatory. But don't poke them. Don't fuck with us, you know. But the U.S. says we will nuke anyone. They've plotted to nuke China dozens of times. Ask Daniel Ellsberg, but not just him. Ask anyone who's ever been up inside the Rand Corporation. You know, so you have to counter. The Hawaiians didn't build this. They didn't want to build a subaquatic vehicle like China to go around the world, right, and stab British and French and American naval ships and then take over Europe, right? But that was part of the subaquatic vehicle. It was specifically called the fish ram, and the design was designed to be basically invisible and unhittable by Western naval vessels. There was no such thing as submarines at the time. And it would sneak up and basically take out any naval vessel before they could figure out what hit them. And if the Hawaiians had achieved and built it in that, they didn't have enough time and resources to get sufficient fish ram built. Basically, they did later build it and it worked. If they were able to get that done, right? It's similar to the China story. Like, there's another version of Hawaii where Hawaii and China and Hawaii and China work together to mass produce the fish ram, right? Submarine, decades before any Western power gets a submarine military technology. So again, arms. There is an arms race, but it's not good. It's not productive, really, ultimately, and it makes the world more dangerous. But if Hawaii, China, Asia, and Pacific countries had worked together, let's say Hawaii sold the plans to the fish ram, Hawaii gave more intelligence to the Chinese, said the Westerners are coming right now. You need to get ready. You need to modernize your military faster. Like, Ching, you guys got to get your act together, like, right now. Because you can't rest on the laurels that Britain will not, massacre 50,000 of you. Britain will not respect the law of the sea. Britain will not care about 1 million dead Chinese from opium and narcotics. And if the Hawaiians said, hey, you got to get ready. Here's the plans to build fish ram. Build a super advanced, build the hypersonic missile build the hypersonic fractional orbital bombardment strike, thermonuclear strike weapon of the 1800s. Deter Western imperial aggression with our fish ram that we've invented. Because you have more people, you have more productive capacity. you know, or something, right? Just imagine if that's the game I want to play. Where, well, what if that works out, and then you have the end of the imperial colonial era in the 1800s. Africa gets the fish ram. Africa gets brought into the fold of the revised Silk Road in the middle of the 1800s, right? You skip the whole 20th century. You could potentially skip some of the World War because the Europeans are unable to fight over a lot of the colonies because they're getting their colonies undone by win-win cooperative trade and non-colonial relationships between China, between Hawaii, between other Pacific Islands, and Africa and Central South America, right? It doesn't need to take, I don't think it needed to take till 2022 for Syria, Nicaragua, Cuba, Central South America countries to join the Belt and Road. It didn't take till 2022, didn't have to take till 2022 for Africa to finally get a breath of fresh air and stop being enslaved, bombed into the Stone Age, subjugated, and forced underdeveloped so that France can have 90% of Niger's uranium, right? So that all of Congo's Leopold II, 10 million child murdering king, fucking genocider in chief, Mr. Leopold II, descendants can have jewels and fancy tea parties in Belgium, while the Congolese have 5 million deaths in the 1990s. 5 million deaths in Congo in the 1990s didn't have to happen if the colonial era ended in the 1800s. You know, Vietnamese 2 million dead in the Vietnam War didn't have to happen in that way, maybe not in that number. If the colonial era had ended, you know, 100 million dead in World War II, maybe that didn't have to happen if the colonial era had ended in that time, because the Europeans failed to get the amount of resources and power and might to build their genocidal, murdering gunboats, U-boats, AK-40, you know, their German and American machine guns to slaughter everyone, and nuclear weapons, because Hawaiian and Chinese had supremacy in military technology, and they said, okay, now we're not going to fight any more of these stupid ass wars for plunder, for profit, to benefit a tiny minority of your Versailles courts and your New York hedge funds managers. We're not going to do that anymore. Period. And there's no McKinley in Hawaii. There's no McKinley. We're going to get our share of China, because nobody is getting their share of China anymore. Not Britain, not France, not U.S. There's no AFRICOM, because nobody is getting their share of Africa anymore, because everyone is win-win trading with Africa. And if you try to fuck with Africa, well, there is a fucking subaquatic fractional orbital reserve missile up your ass. Nobody is doing a Nostromo, you know, Heart of Darkness, you know, Spanish silver mines and bloodletting and pouring boiling water down the throats of indigenous peoples and colonized peoples and neo-colonized peoples in Central South America, because their fractional orbital reserve bombardment missiles coming out of Bolivia that will fuck you up in Madrid or in Paris or wherever the fuck you are, because guess what? South and Central America have military supremacy as part, military countervailing threat deterrence in a anti-imperial socialist bloc that unites Asia, the Pacific, the Americas, Africa, and the rest of the non-Euro world, basically. And Japan is like, Japan doesn't slaughter 30 million Chinese because they don't get brought into the fold with Britain and the US working with them to stop the spread of communism as part of the imperial complex. Taiwan doesn't become the Taiwan that it is because China doesn't lose Taiwan ever, because they have military, because they have when the Japanese vessels come through to try to, you know, and the Treaty of Shimonoseki, when the Japanese come through to take Taiwan, the Chinese say, no, don't fuck with us, because we have Hawaiian subaquatic vehicles that can fuck up your Japanese your vessels, and we haven't let down our guard. So Japan, stay in your little island, because or there might not be a Kyoto or a Tokyo. So you might want to stay in your little island over there. And there's no Britain or America going to save you, because Britain and America aren't fucking with us anymore. Right? The Japanese today the Japanese Prime Minister, right? You see that? The Japanese Prime Minister has come out with a samurai sword. Right? You see that one? Alright, sorry. What was it? The Japanese... What was it? The Japanese... I forget. It was what was it? Ukrainian ambassador to Japan in samurai attire, right? But but part of what's going on is in Japan, the U.S. is backing a return to Imperial Japan. The Japanese are rearming. They're trying to get them back into colonial era war mode. They want to get them back into they want to use they want to use Japan again, right? To get themselves killed so that the imperialists in America can profit and again use Japan as a pawn and all their people, right? And a handful of collaborators in Tokyo, right? And the Japanese central bank, which along with the ECB and the U.S. Federal Reserve, have printed tens of trillions of dollars in the last decade, almost like 100 trillion. I think if you add it all up, it's ridiculous. They will profit, and the Japanese will die, and everyone else will die. But anyways, so ideally that doesn't happen. But the point is that there is an alternate past that does. I think. I mean, this is my opinion based on what I understand. I don't understand everything in the world, but I think that number one, coming back to this game, right? Imperial Fantasies of Europa Universalis. It is number one problematic to say that there is no possibility of the world other than global conquest, right? Which means global genocide, because that's what these games, they say in the game, slavery is like a little footnote, it's barely mentioned. Colonialism is not even really said. It's just about conquest. It's just a lot of fun in games, It's just playing chess or StarCraft or Command and Conquer. This is just Command and Conquer 1492. It's just a lot of games, right? And that's actually that's not being honest in the Ludo narrative, in the meta narrative. Because this is not just fun in games, number one. Number two, this is not just about some technology, a printing press, and your technological advancement, This is about specific economic, specific decisions, specific economic situations. This is about slavery. This is a slavery and primitive accumulation on the massacre of indigenous peoples is the basis for the wealth of these huge nations. And you can't just be like, oh, that's just that might have happened, maybe. No, that's like central to the building of your Euro fantasy land. And you can't just like gloss over that. Number one, that's what make. Do you want neocons? Do you want Jens Stoltenberg, Mr. NATO? We savage countries. You're all a bunch of savage countries. You deserve the fucking slavery. You have slavery because that's Jens Stoltenberg. Mr. Head of NATO. This guy. Jens. I Heart America. Stoltenberg. Right. This guy. Right. General Secretary General. Right. It's America's little puppet in Europe. Prime Minister of Norway. Yeah, so Norway. So Norway, again, Sweden, Norway, Finland, deep fascist, they don't even realize how fucked up they are. I think I've spoken to a lot of Swedish and Norwegian and Finnish people. Whenever I have conversations with them, I'm not saying they're all terrible, but I'm bringing up, hey, I remember we were talking about science fiction video games. They're like, oh, well, there's no problems in the world other than artificial intelligence might get out of control. And I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? I'm like a native Hawaiian having my language banned, my culture banned. The U.S. is like, we're all falling apart here. Nobody has freaking healthcare. Black people are all being murdered by like a George Floyd. Do you think? Oh, well, I mean, that's just a lot of people being upset about, that's a lot of social justice warriors and virtue signalers. George Floyd was just virtue signaling. That's a fucking Swedish person straight up told me that. George Floyd was just virtue signaling. That's what Black Lives Matter is. That's not really a problem. Colonialism, that's like, I was like, what about colonialism? Oh, well, that's like a long time ago. Iraq is a savage country. Afghanistan has too many terrorists in it. That was a Swedish person, like straight up telling me. I'm like, whoa, what the fuck? I mean, most Americans have the fucking decency to be like, wait, I probably shouldn't say the N-word. In Finland, it's okay to say the N-word, apparently, in daycares. There's a black woman who had this whole thread about how this Finnish woman who was taking care of her child in the daycare, a black woman, her sending her child to the Finnish daycare, and the Finnish woman just like straight up called her the N-word, and it was like, why are you offended? Don't be sensitive. What are we supposed to call black people? The Finnish daycare worker said, what are we Finnish people supposed to call black people other than the N-word? What, dark skins? That's literally what she said. And it's not like, that's not a Nazi. That's just like their attitude. You know, and so there's a reason why the US puts the Nordic countries up on a pedestal, right? Number one is because the US is white supremacist and there's some of the most Aryan looking people are there. Number two, they do have universal services and they have a lot of social welfare. And they also have a lot of buried secret racism, and they're also going along with whatever the United States wants. Sweden was participating in Afghanistan war crimes. Jens fucking Norwegian Stoltenberg is over here calling Libyans a bunch of savages that deserve bombing into Stone Age, and then not only has a lecturing mentality to Libyans and Africans and Muslims, Mr. Stoltenberg also has a colonial structure called NATO that literally massacres and gets killed thousands of people, including the Chinese not happy about their embassy getting blown up in Yugoslavia. And like, in this Ukraine conflict, you're seeing all that stuff coming out. And I'm not saying that every person is a racist in all of Europe, but that is unaddressed systemic mentalities and racist and colonialist mentalities that haven't been touched in a lot of the European continent. And I say this because I've talked to some. I can think of some, but I can think of many that aren't. But I think a lot of them, they simply have not had to deal with the mentalities. Why do you still have Black Pete? Why do you have a black racist caricature on your, as a day of celebration? And when the Dutch and the Nordic countries and other Europeans are called out on that racism, they're like, well, don't be so sensitive. It's just a lot of fun. They can't even understand why. Why do they sell chocolate hands in Belgium? They still sell chocolate hands in Belgium. Do you know that? To celebrate the chopping off of black people's hands. Black children. They're little black hands, and you can eat them in Belgium. Don't be sensitive. We just like selling, it's a celebration of King Leopold II, who slaughtered black children and had their hands chopped off. And all of his men went out and removed everyone's hands from their bodies. Why are you being sensitive? We just like celebrating all the Africans we murdered. So all of Europe, those people that, the people that, because that's, in the same way that like you have Nazis in your military, running 1/4 of your military, the Azov battalion tweeting out, we're going to kill us some orcs. In the most fucking disgusting racist anti-Muslim thing one of the most disgusting anti-Muslim things I've seen come out of that was not like some rando's account. That's not, that's just some fringe. No, that was like 1/4. That was the official blue checkmark account for the Ukrainian National Guard. 1/4 of their entire forces, and they let that come out. And that's deep inside of a lot of Europe, and that's, and the U.S. of course, is funding it, is fomenting that, so that it can use the rest of the Europeans as a pawn. But that's deep interrogation that has to happen to address the racism and colonialism that hasn't been addressed in Europe. And people like this are emblematic of that. If Europe can get out from under this barbaric, horrific, and number one, you have to, it's like Empire's Anonymous, right? Empire's Anonymous. We have to admit that we have a problem. And playing imperial fantasy games, designing imperial fantasy games about living this great, wondrous time in a sugar-coated, rose-colored lens view that's all about how fun it was to fight wars and fight these battles and take over Africa, right? This is not helping you. This is not helping the Swedish, right? This is not helping the Norwegians, the Swedish. This is not helping the Scandinavian countries who designed this video game to relive these history. You already have enough non-history in your history books. You don't need to play video games and watch movies about your fantasies, right? What you should have is, you should have frank, serious discussions and listening to the BIPOC peoples of the world, the former colonized and still colonized and indigenous peoples of the world, and the non-white non-Euro world. You should do that. And then also, if you're making video games, maybe design games that don't necessitate, right? That don't necessitate a world dominated by European genocide, slavery, and murder and wealth extraction. You know, maybe don't. Maybe like now allow for the other alternatives, like where, you know, I mean, something else happens in your historical video games. I mean, because they say it's a fluid situation where different things can happen, right? But that's part of the lie, which is, well, different things can happen, but as long as it's Euro imperial, you know, it's like, well, you can have Coke or Pepsi, you know, as long as you buy from a giant capitalist corporation, you can have a Democrat or Republican. Well, as long as, you know, that's how even Europeans are being fucked by, oh, you have democracy. You know, you can choose the Christian Democratic Party or Alternative for Deutschland, or you can choose, you know, this liberal party, or you can choose the conservative party, right? And can you vote against NATO's interests in Europe? Can you actually vote against NATO? No, you can't. Can you vote against, you know, there's a little more freedom even in the US in a lot of senses, but can you actually vote against your oligarchies in Europe? I mean, not really, right? You Europeans you're seeing the result right now, right? Which is that I don't care who's in power. If if a European country votes to have a more democratic country that's less fascistic, that's less aggressive towards Russia, right? Well, fuck the EU. Fuck the EU. Right? I thought the European Union is your ally, Newland, but no. You don't have any democracy there. You don't have any, not yet, not really. You know, you could, but I mean, not in that sense. Europe will be used however the America, and however not the people of America, but however the ruling class of the United States want you to be used. That's what you have, and you have to fight against that. You know, and celebrating a world in which everyone kowtows to the mightiest, biggest gunned barbarian with the biggest flag and the biggest cross and the most fists and the best disinformation is not a good way to fight against the tendency. You have to say that everyone's evil, right? In Europe or something. No, it's just like, it's a way of being that hasn't been properly addressed. It's a way of approaching the world in a non-win-win, in a win-lose, in a might makes right, right? In a disrespect-based way. That still sadly dominates Europe. You know, World War II was lost. World War II was won by the Soviet Union and the Chinese communists. You know, that didn't. The part of the deep lie that has to be undone is this thing that, well, the free world won World War II, and now the free human rights and democracy having U.S. and the West, right, who defeated the Nazis, as opposed to supported, lies. And now we're the free world, and now we have to fight the evil communists, right? And I know there's a lot of Europeans that don't agree with that. Obviously, Germany was cut in half, right? And I'm sure that's not fun either, right? And Germany might be cut in half again. If America would love to just chop Germany in half and then use Germany, right? Fight Russia to the last German. The US would love to cut France in half and fight Russia to the last French. It doesn't care. The US would love to cut Sweden and Estonia in half and fight Russia to the last Estonian. Cut Poland in half and fight Russia to the last Polish. Hey, you know, business is really booming for the military-industrial complex. So all of Europe can be cut in half. They can all be North-South Korea, East-West Germanified, and fought to the last. Fought to the last, every little one of you. And because you know what that is. That is the continuation of the imperial fantasy, but it's an imperial reality for you. So you does it again. So you see what I'm saying, right? So when you think in these terms, like, that's the only way it can be. It's got to be conquest, and someone wins and someone loses, right? And it's us or the Russians. I mean, number one, it's not going to be. It's not you and America. It's America and America. It's always America and America. There's no one wins but America. Only the U.S. ever will win. America has no real allies ever. America has clients. America has people who have marionette strings on them. You know, And when they don't do what they're told, I mean, Saddam was working for America. Al Qaeda, it was working for America, and then people get dragged out of buildings with body bags. America, it's never you and the U.S. It's always the U.S. and the U.S. And so, getting out of the mindset of conquest, and it's not really diplomacy, it's gunboat barbarism. But anyways, getting out of a Columbus Napoleon mindset is very important. And you know, I say this. I was speaking. You know, again, if I sound like I'm like, I don't want to sound like I'm being mean to people in Europe, because we have very generous Patreon patrons, and I know there's a lot of people that are trying to do this fight. There are anti-imperial. There are left. There's a left party in Germany, and there are left parties all over Europe. I know. That are trying to, there's Progressive International, and they're all getting attacked right now, of course, because they're trying to stand against this. So I don't want to attack. I don't want to make it seem like I'm just like berating Europeans or something. But for a lot of the people, the history remains unaddressed, and it's for the benefit. Somehow I'll go hard on Hawaiians as well. I'll be like, Hawaiians, we have too many collaborators with the U.S. Empire too. You know, in my own family. It makes me sad because I read these stories about Hawaiians. You know, I was reading. I kind of way off track. I'm sorry, but you know, talking about Sun Yat-sen, and I actually have in my family, we have Hawaiians who supported the revolution in China, who stood against the empire, who stood against empires, the British and the French, and the Americans specifically, who supported Sun Yat-sen, right, in throwing off of the chains of China, of the Manchus, of the regimes that, and also against the colonial powers, and so brought about the Republic of China that led to Mao, and that led to the 100-year march back to technologically advanced, economically modern, socialist, anti-imperialist China. And so it makes me sad when I know my family members today, who are working for the U.S. military, literally plotting to make war on China, and not just China, make war in Afghanistan, kill innocent people in Iraq, and so you know, I don't want to make it seem like, you know, it's just like, well, Silver Spook doesn't like Europeans. No, I mean, like, I was literally talking to one like 5 days ago, and part of this, I'm choosing this now because of the conversation, because there is so many opportunities if the peoples of Germany or France can like start to, you know, do that same thing and just like say like, no, we're not going to go along with what the U.S. empire wants. Not just the U.S. American people will benefit from Europe not, you know, American people will benefit from not having this huge military industrial complex and capitalist oligarchy exploiting the crap out of them and getting them killed and disarming them, right? They don't have healthcare. The healthcare that Germans and Swedish and French have, to the extent that they do, is because the United States is doing all the warring for them in a lot of ways, and the U.S. is spending 50%. If the U.S. spent even a fraction of what it spends on its military, it could have as good healthcare as these other European countries. And that's part of why the European countries are subservient to the U.S. is because, while we're doing all the war for you, you do whatever we say, bro. But it's not really helping the people of the United States, and it's not really helping the people of Germany or those other European countries. Both are being hurt, right? They're losing money. They're losing money that could go to non-warmongering in Europe, and they're also being threatened insecurity-wise. They're being flooded with refugees because the wars keep getting made, and you know, a lot of the refugees coming from Africa and Asia are going into Europe. U.S. is like, yeah, you guys keep all of them refugees, yeah. And then that drives up more racist parties who say we have to get rid of all of these dirty Muslim immigrants. There's too many Africans in our nice white French or German or other country, Italy, right? And then you know, and the U.S. is like, oh yeah, that's perfect. We make war, we make money, we bring refugees, more right-wing parties, we back the right-wing parties. That makes more conflict and racism and conflagrations. We sell more weapons. Do you see how this works? See, they're using, ultimately at the end of the day, you think you're getting a deal, but the U.S. is always using you. Trust me, I trained to be an Emperor Palpatine or or Darth Maul or a Captain Phasma Star Destroyer captain at right across the street from Obama, the world's greatest war criminal ever, because he prolonged the U.S. empire by 10 years. they're not. They're trained to know how to use everyone else as much as possible. Lie 55 ways from Sunday. They're like the best liars. America is just like they've like mastered that. That's one thing that they've mastered. If anything else, they've mastered the art of like just like being even more duplicitous and deceitful and triple, quadruple timing everyone. You know, that's what they train you to do. And but act really like you're the nice guy, and that's why they've taken the mantle from Europe. But it's not a good mantle to have. It's terrible. It's fucking disgusting, obviously. So you know, that's what we need. We need is more people that are willing to actually help Africa. One thing I was, to see a positive thing, I was talking to one of our Patreon patrons, and they're like, how can I work on a project that will actually like really empower people, like not just like give them a little bit of harm reduction, but I want to actually help them to like get out from under their economic impoverishment, like in the long term, right? And it was like, what if we like paid Africans like German level salaries, but when it converts into their money, it'll be like, it will be like enough to start entire, multiple businesses, and we use that and we teach them and use remote work to, actually give them more jobs. And I was like, that, I mean, like, I don't know exactly all the details, but I mean, thinking in terms of how you can actually concretely, not just token help Africa if you're in Europe or anywhere, how can you like seriously, concretely help develop the country in a win-win partnership way and bringing the poor country up, right? Because I've worked as a social worker. I worked to do poverty alleviation in Hawaii of the impoverished youth of Hawaii and the ghettoized children, and like I've done some harm reduction, and I don't regret the things that I've done, but I know that in the long run, I've done some good, but at the same time, every year I could help 10, 100 children. There will be 10,000 coming out getting poor because at the highest level, there's not really a structure. There's not really anything seriously, concretely being done to alleviate the poverty of Hawaiians and poor children in Hawaii. And it's a different problem than Africa because of the level of development. It's like it's closer to Taiwan or it's Los Angeles, and it's a different material reality than $100 a day being a lot in Africa. But there is a way to do it in imperial metropoles, but it's a lot harder because of the confluence and the power structures of places like New York, Honolulu, LA, etc. So, and to my mind, like building actual win-win ways of doing, mutual aid organizations, worker-owned cooperatives, and networks of those, right, and also supporting decolonial and anti-racist struggles, all interlinked. That's why we do Silver Spoon Games, right, which is a hui, right, like the Sing Chung Hui of Sun Yat-sen or the Tongmei Hui, is to try to like give people like sustainable, non-exploitative, because I'm not affiliated with some massive government. I'm not being used to take pictures with so that some senator or congressman can get elected, to bring more military spending in, right? So anyway, what am I trying to say? I'm kind of going around about, which is that like, people in the rich Western countries and people that are in power in the business or the political levels have to think about how can you, even if you and your country are having a hard time, number one, you have to try to do whatever you have to do to politically direct action and a diversity of tactics to get your country and your people out from under the boot heel of U.S. in particular, but Western imperialism generally, and start and simultaneously try to see what you can do to actually build win-win networks and try to join in whatever way that you can the win-win cooperative Silk Road. Like, of course, you can't like just join. You can't join the Belt and Road just because you say so, right? That takes time, but you can build towards that by internally building, political structures and other economic structures to assist in that, and so and be in the mindset of what we need to do is not lecture Africa. What we need to do is not lecture Africa about how they're backwards and savage, especially as Europeans or Americans. we have to have more education. We have to educate, because we don't have, part of it is you just don't have a lot of people of color in certain countries in Europe. We gotta like educate ourselves about the history that we have with these other countries, what we're complicit in by supporting U.S. policies, especially its military policies and its imperial policies and its plunder and private corporations, and where our social democracy comes from, which is often military and colonial plunder and the suffering of others in a win-lose way. And so understanding that, and then like how can you actually materially help, because China is helping these African countries. This is part of why Germany is freaking out about Namibia. France is freaking out about Libya, Niger, and Rwanda, because they know that China is going to undo the colonies that continue to suffer to enrich Germany, France, the UK, etc. Right? UK is going, oh no, we're losing Jamaica. So not just because it's morally right to do so, but because, wait, you know that free lunch you've gotten. You know how the US dollar is going to lose its world reserve currency status that gives it exorbitant privilege. All the colonies that Europe still abuses around the world. It still has colonies, to be clear. Niger still gives 90% of its uranium, like I said, to France. Less than 10% of their population have access to any electricity at all in 2022. Any electricity at all. You know what you can't do? It's inconceivable for anyone in most of these European countries what it means to not have flush toilets. Like I was listening to Kishore Mahbubani. He's originally from I think Pakistan or India. Lived in Singapore. He had no flush toilet. Now he became like a international diplomat. His kids live in New Jersey. He has a reasonably good standard of living. He's well renowned. He dealt with Kissinger, Clinton, all of the world's presidents. But he said, when I was born, we didn't have flush toilets. We had gangsters in the front, killing people in front of our house. There's extreme poverty everywhere. The dignity of not having being able to flush away your waste, and not having just a pile of stinking shit and urine, in your dilapidated house. The level of dignity of just having a toilet that you can flush was the greatest thing in his life. When he got his first flush toilet, he was like, and now I understand. I believe in this project, and I want the rest of the world. This has changed my life to have a flush toilet. And the Europeans, and not even Americans, but what does it mean to not be able to flush your toilet? And not just like you went camping one time and then you come back, like your whole life. You have to smell and live in your own shit, or be around it for a lot of the day, and worry about dying from treatable illnesses easily, not spreading COVID-19 because you want to go to your yoga class or your party. Dying from cholera, from typhus, right? Worrying about drinking water, your children being emaciated, These are things that you're not going to really experience, And that's so hard to communicate those things. These things that I have not experienced this, but, I try my best to understand as much as I can about these things and to, listen to those voices. Because that's my kuleana as a native Hawaiian. That would be nothing less than that, And to understand that the livelihoods that are had still to this day in the rich countries, which are disproportionately white and work with the United States, have to try to understand that and try to do what they can to undo all the structures, not token good to make you feel good. Don't feel good, do good. Don't, I give $5 to my Starbucks coffee to charity. And so now, that's why Starbucks put emaciated black children on all their coffee cups in the 90s. And they said, look, you give some money to the starving child in Africa. And they had Toto play a Western aid conference that didn't actually do any material difference. It's about alleviating the guilty conscience of well-educated people with 4 and 8 year degrees in the West, in the colonial world, so they go back to work and keep plundering. It's not about actually materially helping, It's very hard because there's no real, incentive. But that doesn't mean we can't not at least try to materially help. And so anyway, so I just want to say, so one of our Patreon patrons is trying to work on, I think, as I understand it, trying to build these structures, and you should. And also because Africa is not going to be your colony forever. It might have been the 1800s. Like I said, if Hawaii and China, and not just Hawaii and China, but if China and Hawaii and other global South colonized countries could have gotten their had taken the threat of Europe more seriously and militarized, had modernized the military faster, there might not have been all of this. But that process of undoing the colonial chains is happening later than possible, but it is happening. And so it's also in your own interest, not only because it's morally right to support those people that are suffering so terribly, but also because it's in your own interest to do so. Anyway, I feel like I'm saying the same. When I start saying the same thing 3 times, I gotta change this. So anyways, but yeah, so let me finish this thing about the game. So I've started the game for some light historical entertainment before finding myself intensely waging war against my unsuspecting neighbors. If Europa, Universalis is an interactive encyclopedia, it is one that transmits an insatiable rage to delete half of its contents. So it's a game about playing genocide. It's a game about playing colonialism, which is a game which is genocide. Europa Universalis encourages the player to act according to an extreme realist view of international relations, where the security of the state is valued above all, and the ultimate way to ensure the state's security is by maximizing its power in an anarchic world order. I'm sure anarchists will be mad about that, but few non-state actors exist in Europa Universalis, and the player's actions have no real human consequences. That's really messed up. This is one thing about Neofeud, is like I wanted to show what are the human consequences of a cyberpunk what does a real cyberpunk dystopia feel like and look like, and it's not all fun and games necessarily, and unless there's a problem with like trying to make things realistic and gritty, but then not, if you want to make things realistic, you're really doing a real disservice, and you're really doing malice, I think, ultimately, when you make it, the violence and the killing is realistic and gritty, and that's fun, but you leave out all the actual suffering and the actual impacts of the violence and the death. I think that is, I like playing like Doom and like games like this, but these are number one, they're not dealing with real world historical figures. These are just like demons on Mars and shit, and it's kind of cartoonish, and it's ridiculous. It's like science fiction, cyborg empowered, supernatural demons coming out of a portal on Mars. And so that is different from playing a game where you are slaughtering, like in some of the Calls of Duty, killing a bunch of Iraqis in a war that the U.S. actually fought, and then learning that, well, we didn't really do any war crimes because Russia did Fallujah. That is doing massive damage to the minds. You are doing war propaganda. You are doing historical revisionism for capital, for racism, for military, for war, for barbarism. That's what you're doing. And those games should be fucking ashamed of themselves, number one. Number two, don't make those games. And if you play those kinds of games, like, or the ones that revives, Germany also has a history with Nazis, right? And there are games that have called, because the players were upset, because the gaming community is full of right-wing reactionary elements, have renamed the German Nazis German combatants. That is also, you are doing a massive disservice. You are supporting Nazis, actually. That's what you're doing when you do that. Literal Nazis and right-wing people, and pushing people towards a pro-Nazi, pro-fascist, pro-right-wing view of reality. Erasing the Holocaust. Actually, it's a kind of, it's not Holocaust denial, but it is erasing the reality of the extreme racism and fascism that is, like I said, it's a longing and a lusting for colonial and Hitler literally modeled his programs on the United States and what it did to indigenous peoples. And so, you know, making those games is incredibly, and playing those games is incredibly destructive. It's difficult to come away from a completed game without the sense that the rise of the centralized nation state of Europe was due to, Europe encourages the player to act according to extreme realist views of international relations, with the security of the state is valued above all, and the ultimate way to ensure the state's security is by maximizing its potential, its power in an anarchic world. It's difficult to come away from a completed game without the sense that the rise of the centralized nation state in Europe was due to cold, hard logic of state security and power politics. This state-centric view of history is shared by most Paradox games, and it leaves a definite historical impression that states, rather than people, ideas, or societies, are sole drivers of history. I mean, that is, you know, problematic in and of itself, which is that, you know, the ideology of the socialist ideology, communist ideology, capitalist ideology, fascist ideology. These things are not. You know, these things are very important. You know, like I said, if Hawaii became, if some, for some reason, ideologically actual, like Hawaiian, Hawaii was so deeply corrupted by the U.S. occupation that they became like the U.S. and became like, said Hawaii will be only for people with X amount of blood, and they actually bought into the blood quantum false consciousness that America installed. I would stand against, and if they said, well, we're gonna have an independent Hawaii, do you want it? But it's gotta be Hawaii where you have to have 25% Hawaiian or we kick you out, maybe violently, right? And if that was to come about, I would absolutely stand against that, because yeah, I mean, that would be the nation of Hawaii doing what its interest wants, but that would not be, that would be ideologically, right, anathema to everything that I stand for and everything that Hawaii actually did stand for. That would be emblematic of full killing the Indian to save the man. That would be full and whiteification. You know, that would be full U.S. brainwashing and making of racialized, capitalist, barbaristic people with brown skin color who are related to Kalakaua, right? And that would be very sad. And so anyway, so that is really important. That's being left out of all the discussions now, right? It's about, we have to stop Russia, we have to support Ukraine. I mean, well, we don't have to support Nazis, right? Like Azov, you know? And not just Azov, other ultranationalists, other elements all over the place. You know, that matters. You know, independence, you have to support Ukraine because you're Hawaiian and you want independence, so you should want Ukraine independent. Well, I don't want independent countries that are run by fascist, imperialist puppets and all of their Nazi parties that are exterminating ethnic minorities. I don't want any of those anywhere in the world. You know, and if Hawaii becomes one, I mean, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened here, but we don't need that, you know. And we would, you know, we have to do whatever we have to do to undo those things. We have to fight, ideally with peaceful means, education, etc. You know, I'm not saying that this doesn't justify invasions. I'm just saying, funding and arming Nazis is never acceptable in my view. And if you have a lot of people with blue and yellow, blonde hair, blue eye flags that are saying otherwise. They're saying, no, it's okay, just look the other way on those. Just look the other way, you know? And yeah, now they're flooding into Germany. Now they're flooding into France. All the Azov people. Now they're flooding into US. Hundreds, thousands, with weapons. You know, and that's what, you know, is that what you want when Germany has re-Nazification and you have an Azov Germany that's because America is fighting Russia to the last German? Is that what you want? Well, we have to support Germany and give weapons to its neo-Nazis because the independence of Germany is so important, and so give billions of dollars and weapons to the richest, you know, Deutsche Bank and BMW, the biggest Volkswagen and Deutsche Bank and Jan Stoltenberg. You have to give them billions and then have them foment and fund and have a comedian become the president of Germany. When Germany has an election, coup Germany and put Alternative for Deutschland in charge. But it's okay because just look the other way, because the important thing is Germany is independent. Yes. Somebody who has a Hitler statue is back. But Hitler wasn't that bad. Remember? Hitler's not too bad. Hitler wasn't as bad as someone else. That's what they're saying now. Is that what you want? Is that what you want in your country? Because there's a lot of people in Europe, unfortunately, but in the U.S. as well. Is that what you want? We'll support your independence, and we'll look the other way for the people with the. Stepan Bandera was the Hitler collaborator. We'll look the other way. We'll look the other way for the Hitler. But the important thing is that you guys get independence, right? As Berlin turns into a smoking pile of rubble. Oh no, but you're getting independence, remember? Just like Ukraine. As all of your food gets cut off, as your people are all being beaten and slaughtered, as the Jews go back into camps. Oh, it's okay though, because they're nice summer camps, just like the ones on the U.S. border, right? It's okay though. It's not that bad. The important thing is German independence. And Germany, if Germany has to fight to the last German against Russia, hey, at least you fought. It's okay if like a lot of them are Nazis and y'all got fucking nuked. It's okay though. It's okay because you need independence. That's what's important. If I was a U.S. military industrial, that's what the U.S. wants, is just to like smoke all of Europe and expend all of the surplus population and make a whole lot of fucking money doing it. Now you look at what other policy is a no-fly zone over Ukraine other than to smoke, freaking wipe Europe off the face of the earth and make as much money as they can doing that. It is literally unhinged out of your complete mind to try to have a no-fly zone with US and NATO shooting down Russian jets. That is, but that's what Biden just said. We have to remove Putin by any means necessary, and we absolutely need to use all the military forces, and we're gonna push for no-fly zones over Ukraine. And he didn't specifically say that, but that's what the US powers are doing. We want to get y'all smoked because we make a lot of money doing it. And I don't, I'll make a deal with you. If my country for some reason becomes fully like, I don't know, just becomes the next Taiwan or the next Ukraine, I don't know when that would happen, but if for some alternative history reason, because the person that's playing the simulation played the simulation really nastily because they're a sadist and they made Hawaii, because we're all inside of a giant video game being played by 7-dimensional type 12 civilization on the Kardashev scale aliens, and they just playing this video game called Earth 2022, and they make Hawaii. You don't support the independence for that. Support the undoing of the reactionary forces, right? Because the independence is, to my mind, that is not political independence in the international community is not the most important thing. The respect, the aloha, the kuleana, and the pono is the most important thing. The respect for human rights, the respect for the rights of peoples to their needs and their material needs, and the rights for people to exist, which means not allowing intolerance of intolerant ideologies must happen. And if for some reason that gets out of balance and we have some fucked up coconut filled Hawaiians who all believe they're Americans. My parents believe they're Americans, by the way. It's fucking disgusting. So it's not impossible. It's not impossible. A lot of Hawaiians are in the military, voted for Trump, believe wrong stuff. Half my family believes super wrong stuff. They believe they're white Americans. They're not, but they believe they are. So if for some reason that would happen, I don't want people to support the independence over violent supremacist ideology of whatever sort. I would prefer Hawaii not be independent, but have undone this reactionary, destructive, and not Hawaiian, and just deeply fucked up ideologies, but that's why it's very dangerous when we like use the most important thing. Now, territorial integrity is important. Independence of human peoples is important. People's nations and languages and cultures being allowed to exist is important. But again, it's like each one of these values and important things has to be balanced against the others. Like freedom to speak your mind is important. But how free is a country when you say 90% of people blown up are killed, 90% of drone strikes the US does is killing innocent people? How free are you when you say that and then you go to prison for years? How free, how free are you, right? Number one. Number two, freedom to sig heil and freedom to spread fascist ideology should not be respected because that destroys the right of people to exist and live, period. Because that's what Nazism is exterminating Jewish people, and other ethnic minorities. So that the freedom to spread that freedom of speech is conflicts with and is superseded by people's right to live. You know, and so that in that sense, you know, that's why I'll be like, you know, and the freedom, the right to self-determination and independence as a nation and as a country is superseded if your nation decides it wants to become a supremacist, exterminatory country, and then it goes and it wants to do that to other countries, right? Because you could make that same argument. Well, the U.S. should have respected Germany's right to self-determination and not fought Nazi Germany, right? And the Russia was they literally used this. The Victims of Communism Foundation is about Adrian Zhang, a neo-Nazi. Says the Germans suffered under horrible massacres and genocide by the communists, right? Well, what you leave out is, oh, and they were Nazis, and Hitler, right? The right of Germany to not be invaded and self-determination is not has to be balanced with the rest of Russia, the rest of the just communist human beings, the rest of people around it to exist. And if the country is slaughtering and genociding and killing people and violating human rights, well, you know. But you know, that's one of the complexities that and that's one of the things where games like this that literally only talk about states and their security interests and their power politics, it doesn't take into account ideologies, right? The people themselves, the human beings, not just the people who have a piece of paper that says I'm the president of this, right? Juan Guaido has a piece of paper from Victoria Nuland and Mike Pompeo and the CIA director that says, hey, I'm the president of Venezuela. What the fuck does that matter? What the fuck that Mr. McKinley gave the Republic of Hawaii a piece of paper that says Hawaii is annexed by the United States, right? That's a piece of paper. What did the Hawaiian people actually want? What did the Hawaiian people actually want? Where was the struggle between the Hawaiian people, the Hawaiian and the Chinese and the other Asians and Pacific Islanders and black people who were citizens and the white capitalist oligarchs who enslaved the coolies? What was the struggle there? You can't just talk, you know, again, that is missing so much. And I think there should be more games that actually deal with that, but they're not going to deal with that because most games are made by capitalist corporations who are never going to tell the truth about ideology because they have to tell capitalist bullshit. So that's too bad. But that's why Silver Spoon Games is a worker-owned cooperative, because I can say whatever the fuck I want. So anyways, but you know, those things, I mean, that's another thing to consider. How can you make a game that talks about the struggle of the people, fascism against liberalism and socialism and communism, and against those, how colonized versus colonizer, right? Not just states, Westphalian, Euro-barbarist genociders fighting over control of Africa and who gets to have more of the stolen wealth of South America and who gets to take more tea and silk of China, right? How about the actual global struggles that actually really shape history and actually will help people in the imperial cores understand who they were actually, as hard as it is, who they are and who they can be. You know, who they can be if they cast off and let go of the imperial fantasy and get in and join in the win-win cooperative reality. Get out of the imperial fantasia, disgusting, you know, World of Warcraft, StarCraft land, right? Get out of civilization and Europa Universalis. Get out of Call of Duty, right? Get out of neocon, Euro nostalgia for a bloody, super immoral era, right? And a defeatist, imperial realist. Now they call it capitalist realist, but there's also an imperial colonial realist world. That's a lot of the Machiavellian, not necessarily Machiavellian, but a lot of that. Well, someone's got to run Hawaii. It's either Russia or China or US, so it's better be US. You have to get out of that fantasy land, and you have to get into thinking about how can we live in a actual equal, actual freedom respecting, actual democratic, actual cooperative non-colonial world, you know, and because it's you know, I already said why. But anyways, let me finish this. The view of history is so myopic, to say the least. It has led to some embarrassing shortcomings in the games. In previous editions of Europa Universalis, technological advancement was treated as inherently tied to a country's inclusion in or exclusion from a Western technological group. Slavery, meanwhile, was relegated to the status of a minor historical footnote. So, you know, slavery is central to the gross super profits that were made, that built London, that built Berlin, that built Paris. You know, slavery and subjugation and colonialism is you can't. That's not a footnote. That is the note. That is the note. That is the keynote, not the footnote. You know, I mean, it doesn't feel good, of course, to talk about it, but I mean, like, you know, that's why you know, we need to have listening to the other voices of the people that produce the wealth, the 450 trillion stolen wealth from global south to the global north, right? In Hearts of Iron, the Holocaust and other atrocities are given a pass in mesh. Again, right? In this Paradox Games Hearts of Iron, Holocaust and other atrocities are given a passing mention or left out entirely. I know that's gonna sell more games, but that's because you're a giant capitalist corporation, not a worker cooperative that's working in win-win cooperation with the members to democratically produce and give viability and provide according to need for all the members of the Silver Spokui, or Motion Twin, or a lot of other cooperatives, right? Which is what you can do in the imperial core countries, is just start to build mutual aid networks. That's what a cooperative is, a kind of mutual aid network inside of a productive endeavor. You know, and so what you when you want to sell wealthy white middle class dude bros on Reddit, right, and 4chan video games and Steam, right, you don't want to make them feel bad. And that's hard, you know, but you know, like, I don't know what Black Lives Matter and what that year should have taught people is you have to sit with the feeling bad. You have to sit with the discomfort. If you're not feeling discomfort, you're not changing. If you're not changing, the world isn't going to change, and certainly your country and your people and what you're doing is not going to change, right? And so the Holocaust was an atrocity, and it's, oh well, let's just pretend it didn't happen so we can make all of our rich white boys feel nice about making $200,000 a year and then buying $60 video games. It's not, you know, it's not gonna help, you know. Holocaust and other atrocities were given, you know. Anyway, so here's a challenge, you know, see if you can make a game that actually deals with the Holocaust, you know, in a way that doesn't make it left out or just a passing mention. Like, have like a exploration or like a simulation game where like the Holocaust gets worse or less worse depending on what happens geopolitically, you know. How do you actually stop the Holocaust? Maybe by, like, I don't know, building more win-win networks and and fighting against the colonial powers and like supporting. How, I know it's hard, you can't really do that because it means supporting communists. It means, you know, because you know who fought against the Nazis? Do you remember, or do you live in the diseducation land? Right? Who actually did the majority of the fighting against the Nazis? Who committed the Holocaust in Germany? You know, it's the ones that are fighting Nazis now. They're not the same communists now. It's a different country. They're you know, Russia's not a communist anymore, but Soviet Union class. But ethnically, and the people that are fighting the Nazis then, they're the ones that are fighting it now. The Germans are not fighting a lot of Nazis, you know, not at that scale. Like, I know internally there are left parties and left peoples that are against not Nazis, but when it comes to actually denazification, the West is not. They haven't been too good at it, you know. They haven't been too good at rooting it out. The U.S., you know, the far right, especially computer science, did a really good job. Facebook, IT, computer science did a really good job of game spaces. Is where Steve Bannon got Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Sweden, Bolsonaro, Bolivia's right-wing party in power. So computer science and gaming specifically has a lot to answer for when it comes to supporting fascism, right? The monster power with rootless white males in the West that Steve Bannon utilized to get all of his biggest far-right parties around the world started, right? There's a lot to answer for. You have a lot of reparations to do in making less shit for the world. People quit Facebook because they said, I have blood on my hands because I literally know my algorithms that I wrote and I programmed, the work that I did as a computer scientist for Facebook literally caused far-right parties, the deaths of leftists and even liberal and just average people. I supported actual murderous fascist dictatorships as a Facebook employee. And they like literally quit. Like a couple years ago, there's one that quit and left. I helped make Modi a reality. I helped support this right-wing, horrific president come to power with my Facebook algorithms. So computer scientists, not just computer scientists, but I mean, gaming, software, and that tech industry has a lot to undo. That's why I made Neofeud. Is to get like, why aren't you making anything better than this? Why are you making these garbage ass games? Why are you programming algorithms that put in power far right? Why are you doing Victoria Nuland and the neocons work for them? Why are you doing that? Anyways, Paradox has tried over the years to incorporate more historical complexity and nuance into its games. Companies' many expansion packs for Europa Universalis have corrected historical errors and deepened the gameplay in non-European parts of the world. Devereaux, who has found fault with many game developers' portrayals of history, says that among video game developers he has criticized, only Paradox has responded thoughtfully. Often, of course, historical accuracy is impossible. Paradox's games are ultimately games, and in many ways, what Paradox is doing is nothing new. The idea of learning from strategy games has its roots in the 19th century Prussia. And this is what I wanted to harken back to. Strategy games have roots in 19th century Prussia when officers trained in battlefield's tactics using specially designed board games. When the Prussians defeated France in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, these games were credited with their success and quickly spread across Europe. Well into the 20th century, similar board games fulfilled the role that Paradox games do for the historically curious. So, strategy games have a history in empire, in colonialism. Strategy games were the instruction manuals. They were the training courses for genocide doers. So that doesn't mean that anytime you play a strategy game, you're going to go out and do a genocide or slaughter or kill 1 million people in Iraq or Vietnam necessarily. But it does mean that the ethos, the mindset, the concepts, and the intent and the worldview of game designers generally, and strategy games in particular, RPG have their own confluence in World War II era United States. But Western games, I would argue chess as well. Like I already said, chess is older than the strategy games. Risk. These games are based in Western colonial, capitalist, and feudalist, obviously, imperialist worldviews. You know, and so that's that. That has to be. That can't just be like, oh well, whatever. No, that has to be addressed. You have to understand when understanding when you're repeating these patterns, and like understanding that they're a problem, and not just going, well, that's just what we've always done. Yeah, well, if you've been killing, enslaving, and genociding for 500 years, what you've always done, some of it, a lot of it probably got to change actually. So just oh well, we always make the game that way. Well, I mean that's a lot of Neofeud too, is me examining like what am I doing that is learned behavior because I was a programmer and a game designer and I was training to be a Goldman Sachs high frequency trading algorithm programmer specifically, or a military industrial complex, Reaper drone programmer, or the software designer for guidance systems on the Tomahawk missiles. That's literally that would be one of the jobs I might have gotten if I kept on going and I didn't do what I did, which is make Silver Spoon cooperative, right? Working for the military or for giant capitalist corporations, etc. So so that requires conscious reflection on what we are doing as game makers. There's all kind of wrong shit. What are we doing as designers? What are we doing as technologists, as programmers, as storytellers? well, that's how story works. Is that how story works, or is that how story works for barbarians, like the West? Is that actually how? Does it need to have those elements to it? Does a story have to have these good guys slaughtering those bad guys? You know, does it have to have all of this like kind of misogynistic and racist and all these other? You know, it's like, no, it doesn't need those things. Like, well, you know, that's all the anti-cancel culture comedians. Oh, they're all just canceling me. Did your comedy need to have the R slur everywhere? Is just dropping homophobic crap like Steven Crowder or Joe Rogan? Was that comedy actually necessary, or could you like make a joke without being a sexist, racist, you know, ableist dickhead? You know, were those jokes really that funny, or were you just an adolescent, immature person? You know, but the same thing goes for all these other stuff. Anyway, I'm not gonna read this whole fucking article. But anyway, sorry, I'm like swearing more, but I get pissed off. But I get pissed off, you know, because I think about all this stuff and then it pisses me off. But, you know, a little bit more on Sun Yat-sen. So, fun fact, Sun Yat-sen actually said, if I am a doctor, I can hope to cure one patient at a time. But if I can help China to free herself, I can help 400 million people. Sun Yat-sen, Sun Yat-sen told his mom. His mom wanted Sun, like in this subjugation, right? Time of subjugation in the mid-1800s. Sun Yat-sen's mom said, just keep your head down. I mean, again, this is Yagyo Universalis, you know, that's Asia Universal. This is Kanaka Moana Universalis, right? Let's universalize some. No, you have to be. This is just Kanaka Moana understanding and Asia and Pacific understanding, right? Instead of an attitude of, well, somebody has to control, somebody has to dominate, right? Sun's mom was saying, well, just Britain's in charge now. China's fallen. Just keep your head down and make some money. Be a doctor, you know? Come to America, be a doctor or lawyer, right? Don't undo these destructive ideologies and systems, right? Just keep your head down. I'm not saying that it's bad to be a doctor, right? But Sun's mom and Sun Yat-sen's mother, as a Chinese woman, just wanted what was best for her son. Her S-O-N son, S-U-N, Sun Yat-sen, right? And so Sun's mom was like, please, just become a doctor. Why risk your life, my son? Why lead this hectic existence of a revolutionary? Sun Yat-sen was the father of modern China, right? Sun replied, if I am a doctor, I can hope to cure one patient at a time. If I help China to free herself, I can help 400 million at a time. I can help 400 million people. It actually is a kind of very similar to Che, who was like, if I am a doctor, I can help a couple people. If I help liberate Cuba, if I help liberate other colonized under the yoke of the Monroe Doctrine, I can liberate millions of people. If I go to Africa, I can help Africa, right? Free herself and millions of people from Euro colonization of Africa, right? So Sun was one of these people, but Sun was raised in Hawaii, and Sun Mei was the brother of, again, this is very important, Sun Mei was Sun Yat-sen's brother. The way that it's contextualized in Britain, in the US, and in Europe is that Sun Yat-sen was westernized and believed in the greatness of Britain and the civilization of Britain and European. But actually, I argue this is a lot of lies and buried history. They said he was Christianized, and because of Sun Yat-sen's Christian, American, and British values, Sun was going to liberate China. Sun Mei actually pulled his brother out when he showed that he was becoming more Christian at the Anglican school. He pulled Sun Yat-sen out of school. So it wasn't because of that. And also, the so-called civilized countries were the ones that are imperializing China. So I'd argue it's actually not that Sun wanted to Britishize China. Sun wanted to Hawaiianize China, if anything. And he said this actually in his actual own words, that he wanted to, Sun Yat-sen modeled his, here. Sun Yat-sen, again, so when you look at this is event held, this is China. President Xi Jinping commemorated the exploits of the revolutionary pioneers like Sun Yat-sen to mark the 110th anniversary of 1911 revolution in Beijing on Saturday. So this is, you know, in the major Chinese cities, everyone knows. Everyone knows. But this is a big picture, and Xi Jinping gave a huge, every year basically, he gives some kind of big commemoration for Dr. Sun Yat-sen. because he was, integral to the revolution and the undoing of the ideological shackles upon China. Not just having China having an independent nation, although that was part of it, but ideologically undoing the colonial, the imperial. Because part of it was actually socialism, right? Part of it was actually socialism. And here's an actual presentation. I'm not gonna play the whole one, but you can watch Xi Jinping speaking specifically on Dr. Sun. This is from 2016. And that's president, like every year they basically have one. To this day, because he's the father both for Taiwan, both for the ROC and the PRC, which both I agree on one China, but they both agreed Sun Yat-sen is the father of modern China. That's him there. Trying to find yeah, I'm trying to find where you can actually see Xi Jinping's face, but you can see right there. Right? So, and he said, if I am a doctor, I can help to cure one patient at a time. If I can help China free herself, I can help 400 million. And then his brother agreed. His brother, Sun Mei, was a rancher, right? I'll show you this picture. Sun Mei was a rancher. And here's a little more on that. Because what I learned is actually my family is actually related to the people who now own the ranch of Sun Yat-sen. I don't know exactly who has it, but it's in the family that now owns. The family that, my family members, technically, some of my family members, technically now run the former Sun Yat-sen ranch in Kula. That's what I'm trying to say. Came out in weird ways. But anyways, so the family picture was taken in Hawaii in 1903, later published in the Honolulu's Sunday Advertiser, January 7, 1912. In the center of his son's mother, elderly Lady Young. The girl, so this is the mom. Again, so she would have been grown up in an impoverished China, right? A China falling, right? The summer palace ransacked, millions addicted to opium, dying from overdoses, right? People getting poorer, falling from the greatest economy to one of the poorest in the world, right? So Sun's mother left because of this colonialism, came to Hawaii. The girl in front of her is Sun's second daughter. Sun On her left is Sun's first daughter, Sun Wen. So again, this is not settler colonialism. This is survival. This is refugee status. Is a refugee coming from war-torn Iraq, to U.S.? Is the Honduran asylum seeker fleeing from devastation, war, and right-wing fascist backing by the U.S.? Is the Honduran asylum seeker fleeing poverty and war coming across the border of Mexico, right? Trying to avoid racist, abusive ICE guards that could put his children into summer camps where his child could die and separated from parents, which the U.S. is still doing under Biden, by the way. They're just not talking about it. Is that Honduran asylum seeker refugee, is that a settler colonizer? No. Is a slave brought by a European to the U.S. and sold into slavery, is the black African slave a settler colonizer? No. They are human trafficked victims, right? Now they can participate later in their generations down in settler colonialism, but people moving is not the same, because that's an accusation that's lobbed a lot of the time, and that's a part of it. We can't take things at this simple, shallow face value. Who moved where? Who was who? Where was there first? Who? This country needs independence. Independence is important, yes, but we have to balance that with ideology. We have to balance that with everything else, human rights. Yes, freedom. Yes, independence. For who? By who? What do the people actually want? Is it just the U.S.? We're going to glue it together in the UN? Nobody voted for it? So Sun Yat-sen, his family came because of the subjugation of the Chinese by the West, right? This is all his family. Photo reproduced in Sun Yat-sen, Shanghai Museum of Sun Yat-sen's former residence, 1996. So Sun is number 4 from the left. Sun Yat-sen is 5th from the left, right here. Sun Mei is 4th from the left. He's a little taller. He's the tallest one. He's the older brother, right? And this is the building. This is the Kula Ranch on the very top. This is the actual ranch. So technically, my family actually now run this ranch. I just realized that on Maui. from the Hawaii Chinese History Center. So that's why when I said some of my family members, because to acquire the ranch, right? The Tavarises in 1908, we signed the papers to sell the Kula Ranch to the Tavarises. So the Tavarises gave the money. So some of the money, I mean, it wasn't like I guess they technically didn't like go and fight the war, but some of the money that came from some of my family members went straight into the revolution that undid imperialism and colonialism and brought the path towards bringing socialism to China. And that's something that I just learned. But anyways, and in case you didn't know, I go over this often, but in case you didn't know, the independent Kingdom of Hawaii was a model to develop Sun Yat-sen's vision of a technologically modern, politically independent, and actively anti-imperialist China, right? It was about removing. I lost my fantasy, but you know, it's about undoing imperialism, right? And the key proposal was socialism. So by extension, this is one of those things where again you have to read between the lines, right? The Kingdom of Hawaii is called the Kingdom of Hawaii because to survive the colonial era, even though it was an elected government and they actually didn't behave like European kings and queens did. The actual Hawaiian rulers actually ate with their and conversed and treated like equals their constituents. They had to call it a kingdom because the British were the most powerful, and without the, again, like I said, without the Swiss council that I had was one of my teachers, in one of the few people that taught me something in college, said the Hawaiians had to, you know, present themselves as the Europeans. Despite the Europeans being incredibly barbaristic, like we've already talked about, the independent country of Hawaii remained independent because they called itself a kingdom, even though they were more like a democracy, and they were more democratic actually than the United States in that they provided for the needs of the people, and the elected officials actually provided universal health care, right? Actually provided the welfare of the masses, where the U.S. didn't. It never has, and it never will. Sadly, it looks like. So the Hawaiians, and so Sun Yat-sen modeled his, again, this is the Wikipedia acknowledging that Hawaii was socialist, because how could Sun Yat-sen model on this Hawaii and then propose socialism if Hawaii wasn't socialist? But that's the reality is Hawaii was socialist, right? Hawaii was economically and socio and politically equal, or striving for as best as it could equality, and that's why it was stood against the local capitalist white sugar oligarchies, right? Anyway, so that's the anyway. I know I go over this often, so I apologize if you've heard this before. And Hawaiian and Chinese often would marry into the Hawaiian Chinese specifically married into Hawaiian families. So you know the Akana, right? The Akana over here. Fuck, where is it? Yeah. So oh fuck, where is it? Yeah, they talk about the Akana. Oh shit, fuck. I lost it. Shoot. They talk about one of the specific families was one of the Hawaiian Chinese families. Ah shit, I lost it. God damn it. Sunway would remain Chinese in custom dress and mind frame, since he needed to acquire only a little bit Pidgin English understanding of local customs of the culture. He was serving in order to succeed in late 19th century Hawaii. Most immigrant Chinese in Hawaii were unwed males of men who wives remained in the old country. As the number of Chinese grew in Hawaii, and as the Chinese businessmen became perceived as an economic threat, Caucasian commercial interests who felt pinched by foreigners willing to work in their trades frequently complained that Chinese men married native women, giving them a local advantage. Eventually, resentment of Chinese economic successes would result in the government later turning to importing Japanese contract laborers to cut off the need for more Chinese. The government, which government? Do you know which government? The illegal U.S. military occupation government that destroyed Hawaiian language, banned our culture. A lot is being left out of this, but that's okay. I don't expect anything in the English and in the West to tell the truth, ever. But you know, but one thing they're saying is the white sugar oligarchies, right? The Chinese. This is triangulating what Adam was saying. Adam Kiave is a very important Hawaiian educator and Hawaiian and Filipino educator who has gone through hundreds of thousands of documents, or is going. I shouldn't say I've gone through all of them, but has been going through thousands upon thousands of historical primary sources from Hawaii. Hawaii has the most printing, the most newspapers, the most printed materials of any country per capita in the world in the 1800s. It is literally the most literate, the most well-read, and the most prolific, and the most technologically advanced country in the world in that time. So again, I always take issue with this. The Europeans won because we are the best technology. No. The Europeans colonized the world because we were more civilized. No, you're very barbaric, horrible, and this belies the fact that the Chinese and the Hawaiians were working together in Hui, which were basically worker cooperatives, like I said, right? And they boycotted white banks and businesses, not just because they were white, but because you know John Dominus, Bernice Pawahi Bishop. There were white. My great grandfather was a white man in the 1800s who married a brown woman. So this oh well, the Chinese and Hawaiians are all marrying together. It's not just because the Chinese and Hawaiians are marrying together because they hate white people. That's like the white genocide narrative. Oh, white people are all going to be killed by black people if Black Lives Matter gets if the police stop beating up and mass imprisoning black people, they're all going to rise up and kill all the white people. That's the same kind of racist, crypto-fascist or fascist white supremacist narrative of a white genocide. That is not what was happening. Is that white people were just so afraid of the Chinese and of Hawaiians scheming together. The white capitalist oligarchy treated the Asians, the Filipinos, horribly. They subjugated them. They called them coolies, right? They called them the worker bees. They had rich white oligarch capitalists because they were capitalists, and the Hui were worker cooperatives, and the Hawaiians and Chinese didn't want to work, not because they hated white people, because they didn't want to be exploited. They didn't appreciate being treated in a subhuman way, neither the Hawaiians nor the Chinese. They wanted to be cooperative, win-win business partners, but the white capitalists, and they were virtually all capitalists, wanted to have win-lose bosses and underpaid workers, ideally slaves, if not indentured servants. And that's why the Hawaiian and Chinese worker cooperatives boycotted the banks and businesses. And this is bullshit that the Hawaiian and Chinese married and the white people we never got to marry any Hawaii. Fuck you. White people, Baldwins and other colonizers, and people like Captain Cook came through the Pacific and intentionally married into the families, married the found out who. That's what anthropologists in Britain were for, was to find out how to find the daughter or figure out the social and political structure so you can marry your British or American son or yourself into the leading family and then take all of the land. That's what anthropology was, the beginning of the CIA, right? Now they support coups and undoing countries and stealing wealth that way. And back in the day, it was about studying indigenous cultures around the world and then marrying in and taking, and if that didn't work, we'll just slaughter everyone and then take everything, or enslave anyone, or So anyway, that's very frustrating when this. The Hawaiians and Chinese were just collaborating, and then they hated white people. They had a literal KKK style league in Hawaii. A lot of them were the sons of the missionaries, Calvinist and Puritan missionaries, who would later back the overthrow of the country of Hawaii. So anyway, this is another Chinese. There's a whole story here. You can read about this one. Anyukyan was born in 1883 in Hawaiian Kingdom. She was a Hawaiian national who lived her entire life in Hawaii, spoke Hawaiian and Cantonese. And here, I'll read a little bit just to hammer this home in case people are still like, Silver Spooky making stuff up. I offer this story as a small act of aloha for the victims. This is after the shooting last year. She was a Chinese. Her parents were from China, came to Hawaii as a plantation labor. She was born in 1883 in the Hawaiian Kingdom. She was a Hawaiian national who lived her entire life in Hawaii and spoke Hawaiian and Cantonese. So she spoke Hawaiian and Chinese. Very important, very important. Hawaiians didn't ban the Chinese language. They encourage you to speak you can speak Chinese and Hawaiian. When the United States illegally occupied Hawaii, they banned Hawaiian. They banned the Hawaiian language. Okay, that's a material difference, right? That's one way you can tell that a country is living in malice and wrong and actual barbarism, not civilization, is when you ban someone else's language to destroy and eradicate their entire way of being. Hawaiians coexisted and allowed the Chinese to speak their Cantonese and the other languages in our sovereign country. When Ayukyan was 4 years old, her white supremacist oligarchy disenfranchised all Asians in Hawaii, forcing the bayonet constitution on King Kalakaua. A year later, she started school in Hilo and loved it, but the conditions of life under the oligarchy demanded differently. Her parents couldn't earn enough to survive. Ayukyan had to help care for her younger siblings. She walked Hilo Bay. That's right where we are on this island. We're like 30 miles from that. Searching for fish the fishermen could not sell, taking these home for her family to eat. She collected and washed bottles, returned for a few pennies. So again, prosperous. Sunmei was the Chinese that had prosperous worker cooperative, or more cooperative than capitalist, coexisting ranches. Like this is the ranch of Sun Yat-sen's Chinese family, the father of modern China. Obviously able to feed his family with 100 acres, obviously able to care for his children, and his children not having to go to work to collect bottles for 2 cents so you can have enough fish and scraps to eat, right? The Hawaiian and Chinese got along well, and people had common moderate prosperity, right? The Chinese word now, Shakang Shahui, under the Communist Party of China, their official goal. Common moderate prosperity. I would argue that in the Chinese, if you ask them, a lot of them will say this is a deep, longer goal. This is also the deep, long goal of Hawaiians. It's actually all of indigenous people's deep and long-term goal is for collective common prosperity, not war and destruction and a few people. Exorbitant prosperity for a handful of people of one skin color, generally of one gender mostly, and of a tiny minority economically of the population. Exorbitant prosperity for feudal lords, for capitalist bosses, for military industrial complex profiteers. Exorbitant prosperity for New York and poverty for Africa. Exorbitant prosperity for London and poverty for the masses of the people in China. Exorbitant prosperity for France and poverty for Mali. Exorbitant prosperity for the 1% in the United States and poverty for the 99%. Common prosperity. And so this is like, you can see the life of Asian people and Hawaiians, Asian and Pacific Islanders, non-white people, doing well, collective, cooperating with mutual aid in a more organized business level and more advanced in the whole, at a country level with universal healthcare. And then the United States occupies, and what happens? Ban Hawaiian language. The Chinese forced to collect bottles. Their own children forced to go to work as child laborers, collecting bottles for pennies, just trying to scrounge up some fish to eat. The same empire that in 1898 U.S. illegally seized Hawaii, the same empire that overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, also dehumanized Ayukyan and other Chinese Hawaiian nationals like her. The year before my typo was born, the U.S. government passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. The act prohibited Chinese laborers from entering the U.S. for 10 years and also denied citizenship for Chinese immigrants already in the country. The argument for Chinese exclusion in the U.S. had everything to do with an imagined white purity. Racism is, you cannot disentangle racism. Sorry, you cannot be like idpol. Racism is fundamentally entangled with capitalism, with colonialism, with imperialism. It has to all simultaneously be dealt with. It was the impetus for the Chinese Exclusion Act, which had deep material realities for people like Noelani Goodyear's ancestors. Under Kanaka-led government, the Anyukyan had recognized as a Hawaii-born kingdom subject. After the U.S. seized Hawaii, they imposed their laws upon us. In 1902, the U.S. prohibition on Chinese people was expanded to cover Hawaii and the Philippines. In 1908, Anyukyan was living in Kukuau and her husband and her first 4 children. The U.S. began issuing green certificates to those Chinese they deemed legal to be in Hawaii. Anyukyan had to apply for it and carry this paper to stay in the only home she had ever known. This is their certificate of identity. You had to carry, because, well, if you don't, we should just get rid of you, because you're not legal. Obviously, Hawaiians never had anything like this. You know, the only thing the Hawaiians asked was like, do not be here to overthrow our country. Do not be here to do us harm. But the Americans were attempting, and this is, the Chinese were only people that were ever excluded from entering the United States on the basis of race alone. Even, African, Muslim countries, not to say that what happened to them wasn't terrible, but the Chinese were only people ever to be excluded from entry to the United States based on race. And that's what happened. 2 years later, she moved to Kalihi. That's where I'm from, actually. After, it's the ghetto. It's the most impoverished, one of the most impoverished areas of Hawaii. It's toxic. It's a slum right next to Red Hill. The water has fossil fuel and lead and copper and other heavy metals leaching into the water. It's one of the most poorest areas of Hawaii. That's where I'm from. That's where I did social work. That's where Neofeud is based on, actually. After she and my great-grandfather experienced racist attacks on a small restaurant they tried to establish in Hilo, she lived the rest of her life in a plantation home on School and Leilani streets. That's where I worked for most of my life. I drove School Street every day of my life. Where Popo, my mom, and I were raised. Rest in peace, Sun Chung Park. Hyun Jung Grant, Sun Cha Kim, Young Wei, Xiao Jitan, Dao Feng, Delane, Ashley Yuan, and Paul Andre Mitchells. Those are the people that were killed in the Georgia massacre in Atlanta. So, and so, why am I going through all this? Because when we go back to this, when Wikipedia and the West says, oh, Sun Yat-sen modeled it on America, he brought revolution to China, modeled on Britain and the United States. I don't think so. Did Sun Yat-sen go back to China and force people into poverty and subjugation and exclusion? Did Sun Yat-sen go back to China and say, you are all going to speak this Chinese and all your 56 other ethnic regions? By the way, China has 56 ethnic regions living for thousands of years together. It's an indigenous civilization, actually. But anyway, no, there's going to be one language. It's called Cantonese or Mandarin or my version of Chinese. And you all, Uyghur language, gone. Hua, the Hui, Kazakh, all your language is gone. You're all going to speak. Is that because that's what the West brought. That's what the U.S. and the UK brought to Hawaii. Was cultural annihilation. Is that what Sun Yat-sen went and took back? Did Sun Yat-sen take back? Right? Did Sun Yat-sen go back to China and bring and bring about the Calvinist Puritan oligarchy? Did he bring an oligarchy? Right? Like what America brought to Hawaii? With white sugar oligarchy, right? God damn it, I can never find out what is that what he brought? No, that's not what he brought, right? What he brought was a anti-imperialist, politically independent, technologically modern country, which the U.S. and Britain were absolutely was. Let me ask you this: was Britain anti-imperialist in the 1800s? Was the U.S. anti-imperialist in the 18 and 1900s? Absolutely not. The U.S. was literally, right? The U.S. was trying to aspire to imperialism at this time. So this is complete nonsense that Sun Yat-sen was going to westernize China. This is what the U.S. was aspiring to, right? Roosevelt and his empire, American empire, U.S. and the British Empire as advanced protectors of nation building, civilization, helping to uplift debtor nations in Latin America that lack the manly qualities of discipline. And what the fuck is this? You know what this is? This is Western history just diseducating all of its population by making itself look good while continuing to commit and subjugate the entire global fucking South. That's what this entire fucking website is. I can't read things in English usually without becoming upset because I know how much lies it's full of. But anyways, America is and has always been an empire. But anyway, my point is that in this time, again, you see the inconsistency, right? Do you see the inconsistency? If this is, and this is on Wikipedia, by the way, so this is not even by China. China has a whole nother take on this. If Sun Yat-sen was bringing Westernism, modern Western civilization to China, he would have had he would have been striving for a Chinese empire. That's not what they were trying to build. They were trying to build Hawaii, actually. They were trying to build Hawaii. That's why he specifically said he modeled China on Hawaii. But again, Hawaii is a small place. The world is full of bullshit. The English and French and Spanish language, everything, print, fiction and nonfiction, all school, all college, all everything is full of bullshit. And I got pissed off now. But and this is the last thing I'll do, and then I'll get off. Here, to this day, by the way, Hawaiian children are still being punished for speaking Hawaiian in 2022. So this is not over. The United States is putting little girls in public schools out in the hallway and being told, if you speak Hawaiian again, you're gonna stay out all day. No speaking Hawaiian in school. So the U.S. still doesn't respect our human rights to this day. Under international law, we are the victims of genocide. Ban on the national press, ban on the language in schools, removal of symbols and names, denationalization. We're still being removed from our land by the richest people on the planet Earth. Jeff Bezos bought a new house on Maui after donating millions of dollars to charities. He bought a $45 million property, kicking us off of the land. Mark Zuckerberg bought a $100 million property on Hawaii, 1,300 acres, forcing Hawaiians from our ancestral fishing and hunting and gathering grounds. Mark Zuckerberg brought, as the U.S. military is poisoning our aquifers and water supplies, Mark Zuckerberg bought an entire freshwater reservoir. Mark Zuckerberg is literally fucking Immortan Joe in Hawaii. What human rights respect? Hawaiians, here, look, can you read this? Let me read it for you. This person, a resident of Kauai, a Hawaiian resident of Hawaii, was told when they tried to rent a place to live. Aloha, Jessica, thank you for your inquiry and congratulations. Unfortunately, company policy prohibits us from renting to Kauai residents. What does that mean? Corporations in Hawaii, land-holding entities in Hawaii, ban Hawaiian residents from renting. Literally, they're saying no Hawaiians, only foreign, only people not from Hawaii can use this land. Literally engaging in anti-Hawaiian land denial. The rent is probably too much and exorbitant, but no, we only allow outsiders to use this land. You because you are from Hawaii, you cannot use this land. This land is only for, you know what it is? It's only for white people. It's only for rich people and white people. They don't want cockroaches in their beautiful resort. That's what this is about. This is straight up racist, fucking genocidal, capitalistic. The world's, hey, are you a tech company? Are you a computer nerd? Are you a programmer? Are you like, against all? Guess what? All of your richest, most powerful tech company executives are doing. They're all in Hawaii, forcing native Hawaiians off of our lands, pushing the price of a house to $1 million next to a meth lab above a highway in the ghettos, and then it's 1.5 million if you want an actually livable house. You want drinking water? 2 million. That's what the U.S. is still doing to this day. And in case there's any still question, just really quickly again, Americans think that Hawaiians lived in huts prior to colonization. The U.S. deindustrialized Hawaii. We had more advanced industry. Before 1898, Hawaii already had electricity and mass transit and railroads. The U.S. didn't have any of this. So technological superiority of Europe is nonsense. So this game, right? This I got too many tabs now. This game, Europa, Universalis, right? The so-called advanced countries of Europe is a lie. This imperial wet dream is a lie, and it's all justified because we had better technology. No, you didn't. This one. And even if you had better technology, it doesn't justify slaughtering and enslaving and genociding and taking the land of billions of people. So yeah, no, Hawaii had that. Hawaii had the highest literacy rate in the world. It's not because you had a printing press. We printed and pressed more books, journals. We had more in the Paris Exposition. We had your fancy printing press. This is what the Europa Universalis says. Oh, well, we had printing presses. That's why we got really smart. Oh yeah, well, we had books of law, newspapers, agricultural products, Bibles, textbooks, all kinds of other examples of civilized accomplishments. By far more per capita than any other European country. European visitors to the Paris Expositions. Oh, your reading, it made you so smart, did it? For the most part, you were ruled by monarchs, and only the highborn were privy to excellent educations. Faced with the preconceptions about Hawaii, the Europeans, the French, the British, the Germans, all the Prussians, all of your very fancy conquerors exclaimed, "This island is ahead in literacy, and the enlightened countries of Europe are behind it." Less than 10% is who had access to any kind of education. And I argue there's no such thing as excellent education in Europe. Otherwise, you would know these things. Right? And you wouldn't have to be told these things by some random Hawaiian educator. Kalakaua, one of our leaders, had invented a subaquatic vehicle when Jules Verne was still dreaming of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Hawaii was a living Wakanda in indigenous future, more technologically, economically, and socio-politically advanced than any nation. So again, I already went over the fish ram. Right? So again, technologically advanced? No, actually not. Actually not. Well, in particular, in military technology, in sophisticated propaganda and disinformation and lying, pretty good. Not actually the most advanced in printing and in reading, though. Not actually the most advanced technologically overall, actually. No. Just the most disgusting and ruthless. And just despicable. The sovereign country of Hawaii had black citizens before the U.S. Civil War. In fact, U.S. slaves that stepped onto Hawaiian soil were free. Like, I already went up through a long Chinese thread about the Chinese treatment in sovereign Hawaii versus after U.S. occupied Hawaii. Chinese are full citizens in Hawaii as the U.S. chained us up to build railroads in the West Coast with terrible racism, lynching of Asians. Again, this is the certificate of an African person who was a slave in the United States and became a free citizen in Hawaii. His name was Moses Allen. An example of actual equality, democracy, and socialism without racial hatred, with greater technological advancement in a non-white country, put the U.S., the West, and Europe to shame, blew their white man's burden out of the water, which is why they illegally crush Hawaii. So when Belgians have little black faces with big red mouth in racist, horribly racist tropes, if you are a European and you wonder why it's not okay to say the N-word, if you still are, because there are a lot that are apparently. If you're a European, if you're Swedish, and you're like, how come I can't just say the N-word? How come I can't just celebrate Black Pete, in this my European country? Why can't I just have my pollywog, my little funny little black person painted in blackface with a big red lips? If you're wondering why that's not okay, I'm gonna tell you why. Because all the things I've been talking about was based on this incredibly false, super racist, and super destructive and with real material impacts to billions of people around the world with cartoons like this. That's where that stuff was created. So in case you don't have any black indigenous people of color to educate you in your white upper middle class neighborhood in Europe, this is why. Because Cuba, Hawaii, China, India, and all the other countries of the world had cartoons like this and parties and festivals with people in blackface or straw stuffed caricatures like this paraded around their Swedens and their Denmarks, and their Belgiums, and their Frances, and their Britons, and their Hollands, and their Germanys, right? And that racism, in those celebrations, in those black chocolate hands, in those black Pete's, in those big red face, the red lip with the black eyeballs, in your board games that you play in your Swedish daycare, where you and your friends are, you and your blonde-eyed, blue-haired friends are gallivanting. It's a daycare game for 3 to 7 year olds, where you play and you go around Africa on a checkerboard, and you try to get all of the gems. You get emeralds and diamonds and Congolese minerals, and if you fall on the bad spot, you go become a slave for a few turns. It's a game about, literally a game to teach kids, not about the horrors of colonialism, but how fun colonialism is. And then say the N-word, and then have black people paraded out in Swedish daycare and Finnish daycare, right? Blackface with big red lips. So if you're wondering why, that's not to be mean. This is why. It's because this was the basis. The racism is inherent and systemic, and part of justifying the colonialism and the imperialism, the slavery, and the wars, and all of these other things. These are integral. This is not cancel. This is not idpol. This is not being too sensitive. This is like literally life and death. This is like literally makes a difference between people continuing to justify war, and this is why anti-China racism is tied directly into the Cold War and then potentially hot war on China. So that's why. And you can't deal with the contradictions of capitalism if you don't deal with the secondary in a Marxist and Leninist analysis. You can't deal with the second. If that's your tendency, you can't deal with the primary contradiction of capitalism without dealing with the secondary contradictions of racism, of homophobia, transphobia, etc. Because they are used to divide the working classes and also justify global colonialism. Anyway, you understand what I'm saying, right? I hope you do. If you don't, this is the cartoon that justified what happened in Hawaii, what happened in Africa, what happened all around the world, what happened in. It's okay because these people are all backwards. We're gonna bring Cuba, Hawaii is gonna be brought from barbarism, ignorance, oppression, superstition, vice, brutality, etc. by the United States to civilization. This is in 1900. This is like right after the occupation. They made this cartoon. Right? Again, complete, abject, total, duplicitous, bald-faced lying. Through cartoons, through board games, through festivals like Black Pete, through history books and non-history books, through interpersonal conversations, coffee table conversations, just chilling in your 4chan or offline in your soccer field, talking about this stuff, echoing this nonsense. In your video games, in your movies, in your board games, in your 4X games, in your strategy games, echoing this bullshit, this malicious, deadly bullshit. So that's why. Don't do that shit, okay? Don't participate in that. Asia, particularly Chinese. Anyway, I already did that one. So this is the palace that had electricity before the United States. Fun fact, Hawaii actually had flush toilets when the US president was still pooping in an outhouse because he was superstitious. The president of the United States was superstitious. He believed that his immortal soul could be sucked out by the demonic water vortex swirling down to hell. Or something like that. He was superstitious. He was like afraid of the toilet. On a religious basis. Hawaiians accepted all these technologies. Hawaiians used vaccines. With no anti-vax or anti-mask rallies at all. What is Europe doing? Oh, that's right, blowing itself up with half the goddamn continent. The so-called advanced European countries protesting against basic medical science and my freedom to not wear a mask. You know what's more important than that? The freedom to use a flush toilet. You know what's more important than that? The freedom to have your basic needs met. But that's not a thing that a lot of Europeans know yet. They don't know the importance of that freedom yet, but maybe they will soon if they have freeze in the dark and all of their food supplies disappear. But anyways, I hope that is not what it takes. But just remember that this is the history. And Hawaiians, who many Hawaiians would go from not having electricity, from not having a lot of these new technologies, to rapidly advancing, right? Just like China has people in their same lifetime, they go from like, biking through a dirt mud patch with their dad, the dad biking with a kid in a backpack, to the son driving the dad in a Mercedes on a fully paved, the most advanced road in the world, right? The most advanced rail in the world. Within a generation, Hawaiians also rapidly advanced because they were socialists. That's what happens, right? When you don't have a tiny minority of people taking exorbitant amounts, massive amounts of the productivity and the labor value of the people and wasting their productive value by exploiting them and not allowing them to get the education that enables them to be more productive. Hawaii's coup backed by US. Anyway, so Hawaii's coup was backed by global diplomacy. U.S. does not respect. Anytime anybody says the U.S. is here to defend freedom, human rights, and territorial integrity and sovereignty, just remember, like everything else, the West is full of the fucking most disgusting, egregious liars. And that's the end. Okay, I could go on this forever. Yeah, that's already almost 3 o'clock. It's fucking late. Okay, so I got a short one last time, so I'm doing a longer one this time. I had like a 2-hour stream last time, so this is like a closer to the longer stream. But anyway, all of this to say that, finally, don't remember, where's my original thing? Don't forget that, I'm not saying that this game sucks. I haven't played it. I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that the fantasies, the daydreams, the games, the movies, the shows, and the narratives, fiction and non-fiction, that are enjoyed and engaged in by masses of people in countries like the US and in imperial metropoles. Imperial metropoles have imperial fantasies, and to have something other than those, to have something anti-imperialist, you need to have anti-imperial fantasies and anti-imperial realities. You have to have win-win cooperative, non-colonial, right? Fantasies, games, movies, and also history. Anti-imperial history. That's what I try to do, right? As like the 1% in English that actually is anti-imperial, because most of it's not. Turn on your news, right? So it's important to remember and when you relive your history from an imperial lens, right? It's not simply getting a historical education. You are infusing. You're always weighting that history with a moral valence, with a particular worldview on that history. And if it's coming from an all-white production team in upper middle class Swedish suburbs, like this game, then you're going to have a particular worldview imbued and a particular tone that's not going to be the most beneficial to changing your imperial, colonial, racist ways. So what does that mean? Oh, Silverspook, are you saying that the Swedish company has to have more input from black, indigenous, and people of color and anti-imperialists from around the world? Yeah. Are you saying that maybe we don't have to play games that are made by like very monocultural, mono skin tone, mono gendered sort of places? Yep. Are you saying that just having a rainbow token, black and brown and trans and women with upper level production, finance, and creative control managed by a bunch of white executives that are all men? Yep. Which is what most of the Democratic Party is, that last thing. That's also not cool. That's why Reservation Dogs is better than all the other shows, because it has indigenous creative control. Anyway, so I could go on this forever. So that's the end to say we need to have non-imperial fantasies, or anti-imperial, even better, like Neofeud. Neofeud is a dystopic, cyberpunk, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, anti-racist game, and I don't pretend like it's not. Fuck capitalism, period. Play the goddamn Neofeud. You see, you can't say that when you work for some giant-ass AAA capitalist company. You can't do that. You know, like I literally got fired for doing shit like that at other companies. That's why I love. That's one thing. That's one of the great things about working for yourself and being a cooperative and working with people that you share ideological, aspects. Not just as a country, but also as a business, because it is still business. We need to make money so we can keep doing this what we're doing, and fund Neofeud too. But Neofeud is that. That was my purpose of making the game. It was to make a political statement. It's not apolitical. It's absolutely political. Anyways, so it's also like Disco Elysium. Disco Elysium is another developers that thank Marx and Engels, and then they got chased off the stage because the Game Awards in the game industry is not about that. They're not about that. They chased them off the stage at the Game Awards 2019. Anyways, but Disco Elysium is like Neofeud. It's very story centric, and it's but Neofeud is more cyberpunk, and also I had full voice acting when the game came out. Anyways, if you have a second to leave even a very short review, it is greatly appreciated because it does increase the likelihood that people can discover the game when they are browsing on the site. Also, don't forget you can also support Silver Spook Games. You can also get Neofeud at itch.io for Windows. I feel like I was selling Little Caesars pizzas. Pizza, Windows. Anyways, you can get Neofeud for Windows, Macs, and Linux on itch.io. You can get it DRM free if you don't like digital rights management. You can get it without getting Steam if you don't like Steam. You can also get it with maximum revenue coming to the creators like myself. You can also check out games such as where's all the games? Yeah, there you go. You can also check out Decolonators, which is a retro platformer game about kicking capitalist colonizer butts out of Vietnam. I don't know if you know this, but this game is pretty mask-off, full-on anti-capitalist. You play a communist Vietnamese woman kicking America's colonizer asses. So I don't know how much on the nose. I don't know how much clearer I can get than this one. You know what I'm saying? But if you want to play like a retro arcade game where you kick out colonizer butts and the U.S. Empire blowing your villages up. And you get to fight literal Margaret Thatcher, but not quite Tina Thatcher, and John McCain's even nastier brother John McPain, the guy who went to Europe and supported neo-Nazis, so that you're all in a fucking quagmire. You can play Decolonators for $3. You can also check out Woman. Woman is a book by Holly, my partner, which is from a woman raised in a right-wing evangelical Protestant Christianity. And it's not meant to be a historical retelling, but it is a irreverent retelling of the life of Jesus. And it's about dunking basically on right-wing conservative Christianity. Some of the kind of dickheads who came and overthrew Hawaii. And this is a book about that. And so you can get it for free, or you can also name your price if you want to support us here. Also, don't forget you can support us through Patreon at patreon.com. Again, thanks again to all of our Patreon patrons. And you can always support us here at patreon.com/Neofeud, where you can get access to the Silver Spook Discord, behind the scenes on what Silver Spook Games is doing, like on Neofeud 2 especially. And also you can get you can support us in an ongoing fashion and help us feed, clothe, house, maintain the roof, fix the cars, keep the cars with the fluids they need, keep the lights on and electricity and the internet coming in. Electricity is going up 20%, so it sucks, but it really is really appreciated, because without that support, we cannot do all the education that we try to do here. So really, thank you very much. And if you aren't, consider, like, how much is this worth? Is this stream worth? Is my 4 hours worth 25 cents an hour? For $1 a month, you get that's like 3 cents. For $1 a month, you're getting because I stream for 40 hours a month. I don't know, 50, 60 hours. I don't know what it is. It's almost 80 hours. So for $1, you get you give me 1 cent an hour of stream. But anyways, but yeah, anyway, if you have the discretionary money, I know everybody's in a tight spot, but we can really use it. At Silver Spook Games at Octanon.social, you can follow us for Silver Spook Games on Mastodon, which is Mastodon is a non-capitalist federated open source social media platform like Twitter, but without billionaires, Wall Street, the military industrial complex, and Silicon Valley big tech deciding what you see and what you don't see. However, while we have access to the Death Star satellites, of course, you can follow us at Silver Spook Guy for my personal takes and stuff like this. When I have Imperial fantasies and not when I dunk on them. And you can also follow Silver Spook Games for the games related stuff if you are more interested in the games related stuff like Neofeud 2. I'm gonna talk more about game stuff in the evening. if you're more interested in that stuff, then you can follow Silver Spoon Games minus the E in silver, like for updates on the games, screenshots when the game goes on sale, and other things like that. When Neofeud 2 is going to come out. You can also follow Terminus Cyberstar, which is Terminus C, which is a Twitter handle for this game, which I'm the content director / lead writer on it. It is a cyberpunk RPG like Deus Ex and System Shock from the late 90s and early 90s, and it's a game that's very much it's another indie game. It's not as big as Cyberpunk 2077, but it is a bigger team. I'm not the content director. It is I'm not the producer. It is being produced by Aaron, my friend, and doing lots of good work on it. So I can't tell you when exactly it's going to come out. That's up to Aaron. But it is always having new updates, and it's always looking better and better. Like this is one of the recent. They added weather systems and elevators and all kind of stuff going on here. It's like a lot. There's a whole lot going on in this game now. It's like a lot bigger than I could have imagined. But Terminus Cyberstar is a sequel to Terminus Machina, my Deus Ex Total Conversion. But Terminus Cyberstar will be standalone. Join the Discord there, and thank you very much to all these people on the list right here. Thanks to all those people, and of course our newest, very generous patron, Tobias Braun. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Who's very at the highest possible level, and we know that Tobias is doing very good work in other respects for peoples around the world. So thanks to everybody for supporting us, and thanks everybody for watching. Thanks a lot, Big Teal, and thanks of course Holly for the always important moderation. And I will be back in the evening to around 9 Pacific to do more chilling out, playing some games. I'll talk about Neofeud 2 and yeah, we'll see. I got this Aliens game. I might end up playing some of that. We'll see. Until next time, keep your mirror shades polished. Be excellent to each other. And no more. Just ease up on the Imperial Power Fantasy.